28-year-old Nancy McEvers passed away in her home in the Durham community of Washington County, Oregon, on a chilly winter morning in 1983. She was thought to have committed suicide, and there was no suspicion of foul play. The family tried to come to terms with Nancy's passing as the case went cold because it was thought to be a suicide. After 40 years, fresh information surfaced that completely altered the case's trajectory. In 2023, the Nancy McEvers case's mystery was finally solved. After 40 years, what new information enabled police to discover the truth? The Portland metro area is made up of Washington County, which is Oregon's second most populous county out of the state's 36 total counties. One of the main factors that draws people to the Washington County of Oregon and makes them want to settle there is the spectacular backdrop and the rich flora that surrounds it. The allure of this area is the friendly people, the old-fashioned homes, and the hills and mountains that surround the splendid landscape. It is the most populous Washington County in America, with about 600,000 residents. It provides a haven for people looking to escape the bustle of daily life with a culturally vibrant community and a wide range of recreational options like hiking, nature walking, and fishing. But regrettably, it also holds a sinister secret, and it is in this neighborhood that our case today began. In the year 1955, Nancy McEvers was born in Oregon. Lenore Pepper, Nancy's mother, who is currently 97 years old, was accustomed to hearing the adjectives sweet and beautiful used to describe her daughter. Nancy was described as friendly by everyone, regardless of whether they had known her for years or were just meeting her. Both of Nancy's sisters were very close to her. She was loved by both her younger sister, Diane Grill, and her older sister, Janet Aglitis. Because she was the middle child between her mother and the sisters, she frequently served as a mediator. People enjoyed interacting with Nancy and spending time with her because of her loving, caring nature, and outgoing personality. Her maternal instincts were very strong, and she had always been the most compassionate of her sisters. She consequently loved being a mother after she married Randall Randy McEvers and gave birth to a son. Everyone was aware of the fact that she loved being a mother. The aspirations of Nancy's sisters as children were realized because of her love for them and her own child. The three sisters had intended to raise their children jointly. Unexpectedly, the three sisters' first children were born 18 months apart. Their happy and close-knit upbringing was already planned, but in a tragic turn of events, it was to be abandoned in the end. It was a chilly winter morning in the stunning Washington County of Oregon. On January 2, 1983, police received a call from Randall McEvers at 10:38 in the morning. Randall appeared to be inconsolable over his wife's suicide. Deputies from the Washington County Sheriff's Office arrived at the 17300 block of Southwest Rivendell Drive in Durham, a neighborhood that had joined Washington County after 1983 but had not previously been a part of it. The body of Nancy McEvers with a gunshot wound to the head was discovered by the police. Despite the seriousness of the wound and the odds against Nancy surviving, paramedics sped to transport her to a nearby hospital. By merely looking at her, she was almost immediately declared dead. Nancy McEvers' death was determined to be a suicide. At the crime scene, a Smith & Wesson revolver was discovered and taken by the detectives. Inconsistencies on what might have happened to Nancy didn't emerge until after the police began questioning suspects. Only Nancy had been at home during the alleged suicide, along with her 30-year-old husband, Randall, and their 1-year-old son. The crime scene led the investigators to wonder whether Randall had witnessed the suicide or if it took place in a closed area. To make a progress in the investigation, the police needed to wait for the forensic reports. The Nancy McEvers case proved to be much more complicated than the police had anticipated once they received the reports. It didn't take long for investigators to realize there was something else going on in this case after the autopsy report, forensic tests, and ballistic tests were done. The crime lab of the Oregon State Police quickly determined from the medical reports that the case could not have been a suicide. There were far too many irregularities. It is possible to detect gun residue on someone's hands and clothing by taking samples and processing them to look for fused lead, antimony, or barium particles. The first discrepancy was that Nancy's hands were free of any signs of gunshot wounds, but it didn't directly demonstrate anything. This is because the residue can easily be washed away when it comes into contact with other things and can only be detected 6 to 8 hours after the shot was fired. So, even though it was a significant discovery, it was insufficient. When the medical examiner stated that Nancy's wound was too wide to be a suicide case, the second inconsistency appeared. The distance between the person and the gun's muzzle increases with the size of the wound. The report also mentioned that Nancy was battling or attempting to defend herself if there were charred particles on her clothing. With her husband Randall and their 1-year-old child, Nancy had been at home by herself. There were no other people present and no instances of forced entry, according to Randall. The police had, of course, located their main suspect. Detectives began questioning Randall as soon as they could. He gave them the essentials, then admitted that he and Nancy had been fighting over the gun and that, during the commotion, he couldn't remember who had pulled the trigger. Randall changed his story, withdrew his statement, and gave the officers a new one after the police poked and prodded him further. He admitted to the police that he had just walked in when Nancy pulled the trigger. By the time Randall entered the room and realized what was happening, she had already shot herself. These two iterations were utterly incompatible with one another. The detective spoke with Nancy's friends, family, and co-workers because it was crucial to learn the truth about what had actually occurred. Every one of them believed Randall was somehow connected to her demise. In order to finally make sense of the situation and establish a solid case against Nancy's husband, the police had only needed a little bit more proof. 2 days after the initial interrogation, the police therefore called Randall in for another round of questioning. They were unable to elicit a confession from him. The police were then visited by Randall's parents, who assured them that their son was prepared to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence. But Randall failed to appear for the appointment. He had completely stopped assisting the police by April of that year. The police declared Nancy McKever's alleged suicide case to be cold in the absence of any additional leads or fresh evidence. Nancy's family learned a week after her funeral that there were no leads in the case and that there was no evidence of foul play. The family therefore made every effort to leave this gloomy episode in the past. Not only was Nancy's son deprived of all the love she had to give after her death in 1983, but her entire family also underwent a permanent change. The news had a significant impact on them. They were never the same after Nancy died because she was such a significant part of their lives. When Nancy's family learned of her passing, they were in shock. She was a happy, laid-back woman who delighted in every aspect of parenting. They couldn't believe Nancy shot herself in the head while her son was still inside the house. She would never have taken any action that would have permanently cut off her relationship with her son. Nancy's mother, Lenore Pepper, wasn't sure about the circumstances surrounding her daughter's passing. She had suspicions about Randall, but was unable to speak about them. Lenore Pepper let her suspicions die after she had already lost her daughter, and the police had officially informed them that no foul play was suspected. Randall was in charge of raising his 1-year-old son after facing no charges. Lenore did not want to stir up a situation that she was still equipped to handle. She had serious reservations about Randall, but chose to remain silent in order to safeguard her grandson, in case her doubts and uncertainties turned out to be unfounded. Everyone who knew Nancy, including her mother, believed that it could not have been a suicide. However, without an answer from the investigators, their skepticism persisted. Nancy's sister thought it was an awful accident that was never intended to occur. She passed away when she was only 28. Her life, her hopes, and all of her dreams vanished in an instant. No one anticipated that the detectives would reopen the Nancy McKever's case in August 2022 because it had been closed for such a long time. The cold case investigations were handled by the police officers working in the Violent Crimes Unit. When they looked through Nancy McKever's file, they realized that justice needed to be done. Even though Nancy hadn't committed suicide, nobody knew it. She was brutally murdered. The police reviewed the previously gathered evidence before proceeding. A member of the investigation team named Detective Anelsari described the case as being under-investigated. Since the detective in charge of the case from 1983 had already passed away, there was no way to determine why the officers let this case go cold for so long. It was discovered that the police work of the 1980s was not thorough. The Washington County Sheriff's Office's Forensic Science Unit retested the 1983 evidence, and the results were exactly the same as before. The likelihood that Nancy's death was a suicide was entirely discounted. The police now think that domestic violence played a role in Nancy McKever's passing in this case. Due to concerns for the family's privacy, investigators decided not to disclose to the media which new leads were investigated. Around 20 people were interviewed by the police, including deputies, detectives, firefighters, and family members who were either there in 1983 or had a close connection to the case. Nancy's story was still relevant 40 years later, and as more information emerged after all these years, the mystery surrounding the case started becoming clear. According to Nancy's file, which was kept with the police, detectives learned that during the case's initial investigation, When the police questioned Nancy's family and Randall, they learned that Randall had been planning to kill Nancy because she wanted a divorce and to leave him. One of the case's investigators, Anel Sarek, expressed his perplexity over the lack of action in the 1980s in spite of this clear evidence. "I can't tell you why they did what they did," he said. Eventually, everything started to make sense, and Randall started to emerge as the main suspect in Nancy McEvers' murder. By the time the evidence came to light, Randall was residing in Tybord, an Oregon town 10 miles south of Portland, Indiana. January 2023. The police showed up at his home and questioned him about the murder of his wife 40 years ago. He admitted to the detectives that hypnotherapy had been used to help him forget everything about that day. By this point, the police had enough leads, and since they desired that Nancy's family experience genuine closure, they sent the case to the Washington County District Attorney's Office for review after speaking with Randall. It turned out that the information Nancy's family was given for 40 years was false. The Nancy McEvers case had undergone enough twists by this point, so when police learned that Randall had killed himself on February 8, 2023, they were horrified. Additionally, he left a note in which he explicitly denied being to blame for Nancy's death. The police thought that Randall's passing brought the case to a conclusion even though the district attorney's office was unable to review it after his passing. Now that their main suspect has passed away, Nancy McEvers' case has been successfully concluded. Lenore was shocked to learn that her suspicions about her daughter's death had been accurate the entire time when the police contacted her. Lenore, the mother of Nancy, expressed her appreciation to the policeman for being able to see her daughter's case through to the end. She wished Nancy's father had lived to see the conclusion of their daughter's case. Everyone loved Nancy, so the news of her heinous murder caused a wide range of emotions. Her family experienced all their emotions again, but everyone in the family thought that Randall's suicide was just as much of witness as his actual court case. Although he insisted he had nothing to do with Nancy's death, his own passing served as the acceptance Nancy's family had been hoping for 4 decades. Following the shock of learning that their cherished Nancy had been murdered after 40 years, Nancy's family is informing more of her loved ones of the news, and they are preparing to hold a memorial service for her. Nevertheless, they have experienced fresh grief and trauma. The investigation team that gave her justice was applauded by the entire family. Nancy's family had the misconception that she had committed suicide for 40 years. Although the investigation into Nancy McEvers' death has been concluded, Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies are still looking for additional information. They want anyone with fresh information to come forward and contact the detectives at 503-846-2700 so that Nancy, who was thought to have chosen death for all these years, can receive justice. The case of Chad Insel. Chad was born and raised in Bismarck. He attended university, majoring in mechanical engineering and design. Upon graduation, he returned to Bismarck and began working as an engineer at a local company. Friends and acquaintances describe him as a simple and kind man. In addition to his engineering work, Chad is a coach for a youth baseball team. On weekends, he spends time coaching young athletes and playing sports. He always remains calm and is not someone who likes to cause trouble. His cheerful personality does not seem like someone who is suffering from mental problems or who is thinking about quitting life. On April 6, 2015, Chad shared on social media that he was dating a woman named Nikki, who was 3 years older than he is. Friends noted that he seemed very happy at that time. A year later, in 2016, they got married. Nikki had 2 teenage sons from a previous relationship and worked in transportation for a food company. She was confident and often posted selfies on her social media with only a couple of photos featuring her sons. She has an erratic temperament and often expresses her frustration with store employees. This causes a lot of conflict, causing many people to choose to avoid communicating with her. In addition to her main job at a food company, Nikki also runs a small business that specializes in catering for events and celebrations, particularly in making sweets and baked goods. She has been successful in this field with many appealing creations showcased on her social media pages. On the outside, she and Chad appear to be a successful couple. He works at a large company in a managerial position while she balances her job at the food company with running her own business. They raised 2 children together and everything seemed to be going smoothly until January 2nd, 2020, when Nikki had to call emergency services. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on January 2nd, 2020, 911 emergency services received a call. The incident took place 15 minutes from Bismarck, North Dakota at a farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. The caller's name was Nikki. She said she had been unable to contact her husband Chad for several days and decided to visit him. However, when she arrived, she could not enter the house because it was filled with smoke. She couldn't see what was happening inside but believed her husband was there. Emergency responders, including paramedics, firefighters, and police officers quickly arrived to help. Upon investigation, they discovered that the fire had started in the guest bedroom on the second floor, where Chad was thought to be. Firefighters swiftly extinguished the flames and later found the charred body of a man lying on the bedroom floor. He was completely naked and had some sort of weapon placed on the bed, but away from his reach. This suggests that someone moved the weapon there, as it was not possible for him to have injured himself and then moved the weapon on his own. Police quickly determined that Chad had inflicted the injuries on himself. However, the lack of burns from a weapon suggested that the injury was likely caused by a distant impact. It could have been caused by a gas heater, which is known to be a dangerous source of heat that can cause fires, despite the risks. Gas heating systems remain popular in the United States due to their affordability and convenience. When the police arrived at the basement, they found another source of ignition, a badly burned stove on the lower level. The stove may have overheated during use and become the starting point for the fire. The entire situation was riddled with inconsistencies. The crime scene looked like a poorly staged incident. The strange points in this case are becoming more and more clear. Chad and Nikki live together and raise their children together. So why is she away from home for many days? This caught the attention of the police, who began questioning people close to the family. Chad's friends and co-workers said they had not seen him for days. This was strange because he was a department head and did not usually miss work. Chad was very responsible, so it was unusual for him to miss work. At the very least, he would have called his supervisor to let them know he could not come in. Concerns grew. Chad was last seen on December 30th, 2019, when he was captured on surveillance cameras at a local bowling alley. The next day, he did not show up for work. His wife, Nikki, called the company to inform them that her husband was seriously ill and needed a few days to recover. January 1st was a holiday, but on Monday, everyone at the company expected him to return. Yet he did not appear. Co-workers decided to call Chad to check on him. However, they were unable to reach him, prompting them to call the police to report the situation. They subsequently requested a welfare check on him. At approximately 1:20 p.m. on January 2nd, 2020, the police arrived at Chad's home. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. After waiting for a while and looking through the windows, they saw nothing unusual. The house was quiet. They did not conduct a thorough search or enter the home, believing they did not have the authority to do so. They assumed he had gone out to celebrate the holidays. They reported back to Chad's company that he was not home and that they could not assist further. They then left. Chad's co-workers suspected something was wrong, so they contacted his wife, Nikki. She stated that she was at work, but promised to check on him as soon as she got off. At 5:30 p.m., she called 911 and reported that she could not enter the house due to a strong smell of smoke, particularly in the room where Chad's body was found. Forensic scientists uncovered clear signs of arson. A mattress had been burned, possibly by a nearby gas heater. There were cigarette butts and empty whiskey bottles on the floor. However, the police were particularly puzzled as to why Nikki and the children were not home under the circumstances. Why had she and Chad not seen each other for several days? Detectives invited Nikki in for questioning to gather more information about the case. She was deeply affected by her husband's death and expressed her distress, mentioning that he often smoked inside their home, which she suggested might have caused the fire. Her testimony made investigators suspicious. They believed that her husband's death was not an accident, but a deliberate murder. So they continued to question her. Nikki then explained why she had been absent from home, stating that the stove had broken down and she had to temporarily stay in a hotel because she couldn't stand the cold. However, the strange thing was that the children were not with her or Chad, but living with her mother. During her account of the events, she unexpectedly mentioned that she had to move the children because Chad, her husband, was a cruel alcoholic. She had never mentioned anything negative about him before, only positive things. However, she now stated that both she and the children had been abused by him. She had many photos showing the bruises and injuries her husband had caused. She admitted to the police that she and her children had moved away to escape her abusive husband. Nikki found a job in a new place and was preparing to move in a week. However, her plans changed drastically with the death of her husband. Now that she had no need or reason to run away, she decided to stay. At that time, the investigators had no evidence against Nikki, so they released her, but continued to treat her as a suspect. The next day, the autopsy results came back. Forensic experts discovered that Chad had suffered severe facial injuries from a weapon, and the entire front half of his body had been burned. He was lying on his back when the fire broke out, which resulted in less burn damage to his back, where experts found bullet marks. Obviously, he couldn't have injured himself in the back with that bullet, and if he had intended to end his life, there would have been much simpler ways. The cause of death was determined to be injuries from a weapon, and Chad had died before the fire broke out. There was no soot in his airways, and the forensic expert concluded he had been dead for several days, meaning he could not have ignited the fire. It was clearly not his doing. Someone murdered him and tried to make it look like he took his end life. With these details, Nikki became the prime suspect. Nikki contacted her insurance company to claim compensation for the damage to her property after the fire. Investigators discovered that just days before the fire, on December 26th, the family had registered their home with the insurance company. Less than a week later, the house burned down under suspicious circumstances. Furthermore, during the police investigation of the crime scene, they discovered a package in the kitchen addressed to a man named Earl Howard. This new suspect needed to be investigated, and he was found quickly. In her initial interrogation, Nikki claimed she had rented a hotel room. However, it was later revealed that the room was registered to Earl Howard, the man named on the package. He was an ordinary working man who spent most of his free time at home. Originally from Canada, he had moved to Bismarck, North Dakota, USA, for a job opportunity. Soon after, Nikki was taken back to the police station for questioning again. The detectives began asking her leading questions about Earl. Initially, she denied knowing him, but then she unexpectedly admitted to having a relationship with him. She claimed that they had been having an affair for a year, that Chad knew about it and accepted the situation. She then maintained a relationship with Earl. During this time, her alcohol consumption increased, and she faced frequent insults from Chad. Throughout the interrogation, portrayed herself as a victim. She cried often, but sometimes spoke so softly that the police had to ask her to raise her voice. Experienced detectives suspected she was being insincere and was merely trying to evoke sympathy. After being pressured, her attitude changed, and she stopped crying. She realized that tears could not convince the detectives. So after being advised, she continued to tell the story clearly. Nikki finally provided details about the incident that led to Chad's death on the evening of December 30th. That evening, he went to his favorite bowling alley and played for a few hours, then went home. At that time, Nikki was at a hotel with her lover, Earl. She planned to return home later that evening to gather her belongings before their trip to Texas. When she got to their house, she found Chad drunk and he started abusing her again. He physically attacked her and she stated that during such moments, she would simply leave. However, Nikki then shifted the conversation to more abstract topics. She expressed frustration about Chad's drinking and gambling losses. The investigator had to press her again to continue answering questions. Unexpectedly, she revealed that she had returned home that night not alone, but with her lover, Earl. Chad was clearly upset by this and started yelling at her, prompting her to leave the house. Nikki claimed to have heard a heated argument and a struggle between Earl and Chad, followed by a bang. However, she did not ask Earl what happened. According to Nikki, they simply got into the car and drove away in silence. At this point, Nikki wrote a confession and placed it on the table. Then she decided to tear the paper. However, the detective quickly grabbed the confession from her hands. This action further aroused suspicion, leading the police to conclude that Nikki was involved in the death of her husband, Chad. Furthermore, while investigating the crime scene at Chad's home, detectives found a surveillance camera. They retrieved the video footage, which revealed crucial information. Earl and Nikki arrived at the house around 10 p.m. on December 30th, approximately half an hour before Chad left the bowling alley. They went inside and spent about 20 minutes in the house before coming out with several boxes. This was important evidence as it indicated that Nikki was at the crime scene before Chad's return. Detectives theorized that she was potentially removing her possessions to protect them from a planned fire, which enabled them to charge her with premeditated involvement. It was important to fully restore the evidence, as the circumstantial evidence alone could seem unconvincing to the jury. After this, Chad returned home around 10:30 p.m., seemingly unaware that Nikki and Earl had been at their house just before 1 a.m. Nikki and Earl returned to the house. They went inside, and shortly after, nearly all the security cameras stopped recording. Only one camera, which monitored the driveway, continued to operate. This limited footage did not capture everything that occurred afterward. They eventually left the house and drove away. Cigarettes found inside matched those smoked by Earl, but none were fully smoked. They appeared to have been lit and then carelessly discarded on the furniture and floor, creating a fire hazard. This suggested a deliberate setup. Moreover, it was revealed that Nikki was the sole beneficiary of the house insurance policy, valued at $1.26000. She was arrested on January 7th for conspiracy to commit murder. Although her bail was set at $1.500,000, she could not afford it and remained in jail. Additionally, Nikki had 3 previous convictions for fraud and was on house arrest at the time of her arrest. Investigators went to Earl's house to arrest him and take his statement, but he fled. However, he was not able to evade justice for long. 2 days later, he was arrested in Michigan near the Canadian border. He was trying to escape to his home country to avoid prosecution in the United States. When arrested, he did not resist. After the arrest, police gathered more information from him, which helped clarify the incident of that night. Nikki and Earl had more motives for committing the crime than just collecting an insurance payout on the house. Their relationship lasted for over a year. At one point, she shared with Earl that Chad had $1,600 life insurance policy. They believed that this money could solve their problems and allow them to live comfortably. She wanted to avoid the complications of divorce and the division of assets, so she chose a darker and more lucrative option. They planned to kill Chad and make it appear that he took his end life. Their goal was to collect all the insurance money they could, both life and property, and then run away to Texas together. On December 9th, they finalized their plan and set it into motion. To prevent her children from witnessing the crime, Nikki sent them to stay with their grandmother. Knowing that Chad was going bowling that night, Nikki went to their home early to gather belongings she wanted to save from a fire. CCTV footage from the hotel captured her and Earl bringing their items to their room. Later, they returned to the scene of the crime, where Nikki disabled the cameras and the security system. Earl was armed, but it is unclear who actually killed Chad as they blamed each other. Apparently, the murder happened while Chad was sleeping. He was attacked in the back. He died instantly. Then his body was turned upside down and his face was attacked to make it appear that he had injured himself. Earl and Nikki thought that burning the house down would destroy all evidence, making it difficult for forensics to find any clues. They then scattered whiskey bottles around the house to portray Chad as a heavy drinker. Finally, they put a gas heater in the room, lit it, and left, expecting it to cause a fire. The following day, they anxiously awaited news of the incident, but nothing came. Frustrated, they returned to the house and discovered some small, weak fires that had already gone out. To ensure a more effective blaze, they rearranged the mattress and other items to facilitate burning. Earl went down to the basement and started a fire directly above the stove. Meanwhile, Nikki scattered cigarettes around the room, believing their plan would succeed. They left, but for the next 2 days, there was no news about the fire. Fearing their plan had failed, they returned to the scene. On January 2nd at 5 p.m., when Nikki opened the door, a backdraft caused the fire to flare up. However, their plan failed, as the house did not burn down as they expected. During the investigation, detectives discovered fingerprints and DNA evidence from both Nikki and Earl. The poor staging of the scene was quickly discovered. Even the placement of the weapon on the bed suggested an attempt to mislead the investigation. If Chad injured himself, the weapon wouldn't be placed that way. This detail became a key argument for the prosecution at trial and was persuasive to the jury. Nikki and Earl were charged with murder. At the last minute, Earl agreed to a plea bargain, which allowed the prosecution to learn all the details of the crime. Earl Howard pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit arson and tampering with evidence. As a result, he received a 25-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after serving 21 years. During the trial, he and Nikki blamed each other. Earl's plea deal included testifying against Nikki. In contrast, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was outside when the shooting occurred and that Earl was the shooter. She also accused Earl of lighting fires and throwing away cigarettes. During a subsequent interrogation, Nikki told bizarre stories, claiming that Chad was aware of her affair and had allowed her to meet Earl. She also stated that Earl and her husband were friends. Nikki described her husband as an alcoholic, but those close to the family disagreed, stating that Chad did not drink heavily, did not abuse Nikki, and would not permit her to be with Earl. Chad never made anyone doubt his character. No one had ever seen him drunk, and he always prioritized his family career. Therefore, no one believed that he was a bad husband. They thought Nikki had fabricated the stories right away. On February 17, 2023, Nikki Ansel was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and attempting to cover up the crime. On March 16, 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years, plus an additional 15 years for arson. The sentence was controversial, as Nikki's punishment was harsher than Earl's, despite evidence that he played a key role in the crime. The disparity in sentencing was attributed to Earl admitting guilt and cooperating with the investigation, while Nikki did not. However, the court's decision was final, allowing her to file her first appeal as early as 2026. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012, at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed a court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister Jessica was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student, and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door, ignoring the officers' instructions to disarm herself. She was a small, elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility as a precautionary measure. Medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time of Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system which had previously caused him complications. His death occurred shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Takir Cipriana and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Takir's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival, and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence, along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Lane took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, He became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard and at one point seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager. To no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words, or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing altercation, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, he never witnessed any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations, which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost. For days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition containing expanding bullets designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both the homeowner and the dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Lane, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview, when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911, and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Case of Michelle Missy. In the quiet suburbs of Southern California, the disappearance and tragic death of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila deeply shook a close-knit community. Her story is one of friendship, betrayal, and a devastating loss that left an indelible mark on those who knew her. The vanishing of Missy Avila caused shockwaves in the community, as friends, family, and law enforcement mobilized in a desperate search to find her. The quest to uncover the truth behind her disappearance would reveal a disturbing tale of betrayal among those she trusted. Missy was known for her bright smile and caring nature, a young woman with dreams of a promising future. As the details surrounding her disappearance emerged, the heartbreaking story of friendships turned sinister captivated the nation's attention. This is the story of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila, her whose life was tragically cut short. Missy was born on February 8, 1968 and grew up in our later Los Angeles. She lived with her mother and 3 brothers and attended San Fernando High School with her 2 best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Missy and Karen had been best friends since they were 8 years old, but the girls started to drift apart once they entered high school. Missy was very beautiful and had very long hair, which she loved, and she was quite popular and well-liked by most of her peers. Karen and Laura began to feel envious of the attention Missy received from others, especially from boys. During Missy's sophomore year of high school, a rumor began to spread that claimed Missy had been engaging in sexual relationships with several boys, all of whom had girlfriends. This rumor prompted a group of girls to confront Missy outside of school and assault her severely. As soon as Missy got home, her parents pressed charges against the ringleader of the attack, Sonia Bond. Missy was expected to appear in court on October 8, 1985 to testify against Sonia, but she would sadly never get that opportunity. Earlier in September, Missy had a falling out with both Karen and Laura due to the same rumor that had been spread a year earlier, in which Missy was accused of having sexual relationships with her friends' boyfriends. This time, the 2 girls involved were her best friends, Karen and Laura. Missy began dating a boy named Randy earlier in their junior year, but their relationship only lasted around a month before Missy broke things off, as she couldn't stand his constant partying. Not long after, Karen and Randy started dating and moved in together. However, Randy still had feelings for Missy, and Karen saw him flirting with her. Missy turned Randy down and told him she wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. Missy also tried to be a good friend by telling Karen she should consider ending the relationship with Randy and try to find a better boyfriend. This angered Karen, and she and Laura spread rumors again and decided to confront Missy at one of the parks in their neighborhood. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them she would never betray either of them like that, and that these were the same rumors that were spread the year prior. Eyewitnesses claimed that Karen was seen shouting at Missy, threatening her with a broken beer bottle, pushing her to the ground, and slapping her before she and Laura stormed off. This incident occurred 10 days before Missy's murder. Not long after that incident, Laura expressed regret and contacted Missy, and the 2 of them decided to put everything behind them and continue with their friendship. However, Karen was still avoiding Missy until October 1st, when she contacted Missy and sincerely apologized to her about everything that had escalated between them. This meant a lot to Missy, as she had started to miss her friends, and the trio made plans to hang out at Stonehurst Park later that same day. On October 1st, 1985, Missy told her mom that she made plans to hang out with her friends and her mom gave her permission to go, but she had to be back home by 6 p.m. Missy went outside and waited for Laura to pick her up. After Laura picked her up, the girls drove around for a while before making their way to Stonehurst Park, where they parked the car and waited for Karen to show up. A few minutes passed and Karen pulled into the parking lot with their other friend, Eva, in the passenger seat. That's when things took a turn for the worse for Missy. When Karen entered the parking lot, she parked extremely close to Laura's car, rolled down her window and began yelling at Laura. Laura also rolled down her window and started yelling back at Karen. Missy and Eva just sat there, shocked, watching their friends shout abusive things at each other. Missy had no idea what they were arguing about. Suddenly, Karen backed up and sped out of the parking lot, and Laura followed her for 45 minutes. They drove recklessly north of the city and into the mountains, both girls driving with such extreme anger that Missy and Eva were begging the girls to calm down and pull the cars over. The girls drove right into a parking lot that led to a huge forest. Laura and Karen got out of their cars, confronted each other, and continued to fight. Missy got out of the car in an attempt to stop her friends from fighting. However, as soon as she left the car, Karen and Laura suddenly ceased their argument, turned their attention to Missy, and approached her aggressively. They got so close to Missy that she was unable to re-enter the car or move away from it. Karen then laughed at Missy and informed her that they were not actually fighting and had no animosity towards each other, but rather they were angry with Missy. They revealed that the entire situation was a ploy to lure Missy into the woods so that they could confront her and teach her a lesson. They then shouted at Missy and explained that they had spread the rumors because they knew for a fact that she had slept with their boyfriends and they were not going to let her get away with it. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them again that she would never do anything like that she never slept with anyone, but they wouldn't listen. When Missy started to shut down, the girls grabbed her and pushed her away from the car and towards a trail that led into the forest. Given that Missy was quite petite compared to the other girls, being only 4 feet 10 and 95 pounds, while Karen was 5 feet 2 and over 200 pounds, and Laura was 5 feet 6 and 135 pounds. Missy was unable to defend herself against the constant pushes by the two girls as they forced her to walk further down the trail. Eva was in the car during the entire altercation. She finally got out of the car and started walking behind the group. Eva was not involved in anything the girls did in the forest, and she didn't even know why she was brought along in the first place. When the group was out of view from the parking lot and deep into the forest, Laura stopped and faced Missy, who was crying helplessly and scared, and punched her right in the face. As soon as Laura started punching her, Karen joined in, and within seconds, Missy was on the ground, being beaten, punched, and stomped on. When they stopped, Laura pulled out a knife, grabbed Missy by the hair, and started cutting off chunks of her hair. They did this intentionally because they knew how much Missy loved her beautiful long hair. Karen wanted to join in on the hair cutting, but since she didn't have a knife, she just started pulling out chunks with her hands while Eva stood there watching it all happen. After they had finished that activity, they produced restraints, bound Missy's arms behind her back, and gagged her. Since there was a river around 10 feet away from their location, Laura walked into the stream, looked directly at Missy, began running her hands through the water, gave Missy a smirk, and started taunting her, asking her to come into the water with her. When Missy did not move, Karen seized her, forcefully stood her up and shoved her towards the river, causing her to fall down the hill. Since her arms were restrained behind her back, her face slammed down onto the ground, and she rolled up to the river. Laura and Karen then grabbed her and dragged her into the water. That's when Eva hastily ran back up the trail to the cars. Upon arriving at the cars, Eva realized that both vehicles were locked and too far to fetch assistance. She reluctantly started walking back down the trail until she heard a terrifying scream. She stopped, turned around, and swiftly ran back to the cars, where she lay on the ground in a fetal position and waited for approximately an hour for the girls to return. Eventually, she saw Laura and Karen, who were dripping wet and smiling and laughing. But Missy was not with them. Laura and Karen were holding Missy's body in the water that was 8 inches deep. The scream that Eva heard happened when Missy was briefly able to get her head above the water, but then Karen grabbed her head and pushed it back into the water. When the girls realized that Missy was near death, they released her, ran to a large log and dropped it on her head. The girls then left the forest, got into their cars with Eva, and went home. For hours later, Laura called Missy's mother, Irene Avila, claiming that she had dropped Missy off with 3 boys driving a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura said she returned to the location, but Missy and the boys had already left. On October 4th, 1985, Missy's body was found face down in a stream in Big 2 Hanger Canyon in Angeles National Forest 3 days later by a group of hikers. Police found that she had been forcibly drowned in 8 inches of water and her waist-length hair had been cut off. A 4-foot log was found on top of her body and cigarettes. Beer and men's overalls were found near where her body was discovered. The girls told Missy's parents and the detectives that Missy had gone off with 2 men in a blue Camaro before she disappeared, which made the random items around the crime scene seem more plausible. This false claim sent the detectives on a fruitless investigation for the non-existent men for 3 years. Irene later said she had no reason to suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because both of them attended Missy's funeral and Laura sent the family a sympathy card with $20. Karen also moved in with Missy's family for a long time, outwardly showing support and trying to help catch the killers, all while closely monitoring the investigation and attempting to divert the investigators from her own involvement. Karen was intensely focused on the murder, frequently visiting Missy's grave, covering the walls of her room with pictures of Missy and newspaper articles about the crime, and repeatedly returning to the creek where Missy's body was discovered. At one point, She even told Irene that she had seen Missy's ghost. After 3 years, on July 26, 1988, Eva Chirumbolo, the other teenager who had taken the 45-minute drive into the mountains, finally came forward and told the police everything that had happened. She explained the rumors, the falling out, the anger, and the jealousy, as well as the details of the murder. Eva said she took so long to come forward because the other 2 girls had threatened to kill her if she ever revealed what she had seen. In March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The jurors were not convinced that the murder was planned, and they rejected the first-degree murder charge. Karen Severson was released from prison on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years, and Laura Doyle was released from prison in December 2012, after serving 22 years. Karen Severson attempted to profit from her crime by writing a memoir about the murder and her prison life, but the book did not do well. She also made a deal for a movie to be made about it, but Avila's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take the profits from the sales. As a result, the state of California passed Missy's law, requiring entities who are helping publish works made by criminals to contact the families of the victims about the said works. Missy's story has sparked conversations about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering a culture of empathy and kindness. Community initiatives and support networks have emerged to provide resources and support for those affected by similar experiences. As we remember Missy, we honor her memory by working to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy serves as a reminder that every individual deserves respect, kindness, and the opportunity to live a life free from harm. In the end, Michelle Yvette Missy Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. May her memory inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. The case of Wendy Trapaga Yolanda Cirillo was born in Miami, Florida. She was a 28-year-old single mother who lived a quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yolanda had devoted herself to raising her daughter and being a model mother, giving up the party life. After a while, Yolanda was ready to find stability and a new partner. She began a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man known for his good looks and impeccable grooming. Their relationship, which started out innocent and harmonious, gradually developed into love. Yolanda and Michel met at a computer engineering school. Although they had opposite personalities, she was calm and practical, while he was a romantic, adventurous, and gregarious person. Despite their differences, they found each other and began a promising relationship. Michel and Yolanda Cirillo seemed like an unlikely couple. However, after a year of living together, they started building a family. Yolanda, who already had a child from a previous relationship, was very happy to see her boyfriend Escoto loving her daughter. Everything seemed fine, but Michel still had one unfulfilled dream. He wanted to build a successful career and start his own business. Yolanda fully supported Michel's dream because she knew that his success would ensure a stable future for her and her daughter. She also hoped that they would get married and start a family. Michel promised Yolanda that he would give them the dream life they both craved when he achieved financial success. When looking at the most lucrative industries in Miami, Michel realized that there was a great demand for cosmetic services, so he decided to delve into this field. With a basic knowledge of hairdressing, he wanted to learn more about business to open his own salon. His goal was to create a space that was welcoming to everyone. Michel found a beauty school near where he lived and enrolled in February 2002. While studying at this school, Michel found himself different because he was one of the few men in the beauty industry while he was surrounded by young, dynamic women. These women were very interested in Michel because he was charming, easily won their hearts. This made him popular among the female students. However, despite his relationship with Yolanda, Michel could not resist the charms of Wendy Trapaga, a beautiful 21-year-old girl. He began to flirt with her and often behaved inappropriately around her, but he still did not tell Yolanda about these things. Every night, Michel still returned to Yolanda, maintaining the appearance of a normal family life. But the more time he spent with Wendy, the more he felt guilty towards Yolanda. Wendy Trapaga was different from the women Michel had met before. Wendy was sweet, charming, and had the figure of a model. Wendy was born on April 29, 1981, the daughter of Miriam and Ernest. She grew up in a normal and loving family. Wendy had always been loved by her father, Ernest, who had always made sure that Wendy had grown up in an environment filled with love and respect. Ernest had been a cargo pilot, and his job had required him to travel frequently, which had made Wendy always look forward to his return from each trip. Every time he had returned home, Wendy had been extremely happy and had received a gift from him. March 31st, 1988, had been an unforgettable day in Wendy's life when she had been 16 years old. Wendy's father's plane had exploded at an altitude of 150 feet above the ground and had crashed into a barren land near the runway. This tragedy had taken the lives of all passengers on board. The deep sadness that Wendy had experienced that day had followed her throughout her life. Ernest had been 61 years old when he had passed away, leaving Wendy's mother, Miriam, deeply saddened. After becoming a widow, Miriam had devoted herself to supporting her family and had secured a position as a school administrative assistant. She had worked hard to be able to supervise extracurricular programs at an elementary school in Miami-Dade County. Eventually, Miriam had found love again and had married Juan Bonet. Wendy had had half-siblings who had warmly accepted her, providing her with the much-needed affection she had been missing since her father's death. During her teenage years, Wendy had developed a strong passion for aesthetics and high fashion. She had possessed a captivating beauty with deep brown eyes, long hair, and a radiant smile, attracting everyone's attention. Despite this, Wendy had remained humble and kind, making those around her admire her even more. After completing her studies, Wendy had gotten married, but unfortunately, this marriage had soon fallen apart. This had motivated her to pursue her passion and learn from her relatives who had run beauty salons. So she had enrolled in Label Beauty Academy in Miami. There, Wendy had met Michel Escato, a man who could make her smile. Michel's charm and compliments had captivated her. Michel had introduced himself as an executive in the web design industry, with a degree in technology. Perhaps the loss of her father at an early age had made Wendy more sympathetic to older men, considering them safe. However, Michel had not revealed to Wendy that he had a girlfriend, Yolanda. Instead, he had spent more time with Wendy. The feelings between Wendy and Michel had grown deeper and deeper, and they had spent more time together. While Yolanda had thought that Michel was focused on his career, the relationship between Wendy and Michel had naturally turned from emotional to physical. Wendy and Michel had gradually become inseparable. However, Yolanda had felt confused by the changes in her relationship with Michel. Even though they had been together for more than 2 years, she had not known that Michel often met other women, one of whom had even sponsored his studies. Initially, Michel had only seen Wendy as a friend, but over time, he had begun to feel deeper feelings for her. He had appreciated the freedom and lack of pressure in his relationship with Wendy. However, Michel had always kept his relationship with Wendy a secret. Even though Michel and Wendy had been entering their second month of a romantic relationship, Michel had hidden it from everyone, which had made Wendy feel confused. Yolanda had also felt that Michel seemed to be growing more distant, and their relationship had started to feel more like best friends than lovers. Yolanda had become suspicious of Michel's schedule, and the silence had made the two of them grow more distant. Michel had eventually decided to end his relationship with Yolanda because he had fallen in love with Wendy. In August 2002, Michel and Yolanda had had an argument, and to express his dissatisfaction, Michel had packed his things and left. Yolanda could not believe it. Yolanda had dreamed of a future with Michel, but he had left without giving any explanation. Yolanda had tried to understand her shortcomings and the reason behind his departure. Yolanda had kept calling Michel, but he had not answered. Eventually, Yolanda had deciphered his voicemail password and had discovered messages revealing that he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was shocked to learn of Michel and Wendy's relationship and was furious. Michel and Wendy had moved into a modest apartment in Miami. Unexpectedly, in that small space, the two began a life filled with dreams and satisfaction. Although some of Wendy's family objected to her decision to live with Michel, Wendy's mother, Miriam, was concerned that Michel was almost a decade older than Wendy and, on top of that, he was still unemployed. She wondered if Wendy and Michel had ever shared their jobs or incomes. She was also extremely surprised to find that their house was almost bare, to the point that Wendy and Michel had to sleep on the floor. The most important thing to her was Wendy's happiness. While Wendy was always careful about her finances and kept a tight budget, Michel, on the other hand, was wasteful and unclear about how he earned his money. Miriam simply thought that Michel made money through IT to explain her doubts. Because there were so many questions about Michel, Miriam, and her daughter, Wendy disagreed about Wendy's marriage. Miriam did not agree with Wendy's hasty decision to get married. Ignoring her mother's advice, Wendy and Michel decided to go ahead with the wedding. They planned to hold a wedding ceremony at the City Hall in October 2002, with a simple legal procedure and a not-so-complicated wedding ceremony. When Miriam asked why they got married so quickly, Wendy revealed that she was pregnant. On October 10, 2002, Wendy and Michelle exchanged vows at the Miami Beach City Hall. They then planned a simple honeymoon in Key West, Florida. Michelle and Wendy left on Friday, October 11th, planning to return Sunday evening. Their two-day adventure in Key West was filled with fun times. However, on Sunday, Michelle and Wendy were reluctant to let their short vacation end. Michelle had booked a luxurious suite in a prestigious romantic hotel. Wendy was thrilled to have their honeymoon extended unexpectedly. Wendy informed her mother of the decision to extend their stay. Wendy's mother, Miriam, was also delighted to hear the news. Although she was concerned about Wendy's health due to her pregnancy, Miriam was happy for her daughter's happiness. Michelle and Wendy envisioned a romantic evening that included dining out, perhaps watching a movie, or dancing the night away at a nightclub. Michelle and Wendy arrived at the hotel close to midnight and spent some time alone together in their room. Little did they know that this would be Wendy's last night on Earth. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, Miriam was awakened by a surprise phone call. When she looked at the clock, she felt anxious about such an early call. Miriam picked up the phone feeling even more nervous. It was Michelle on the other end of the line, asking her if Wendy was with her and speaking in a cryptic tone. Michelle explained that they had gone out drinking the night before, and Wendy had wanted to stay even though he had been worried about their unborn child. This had led to their first argument in the car on the way home. He had gone back to the apartment alone while leaving her outside. When he had checked back after 5 to 10 minutes, she had disappeared. All attempts to contact her by phone had failed. After her conversation with Michelle, Miriam had agreed to give Wendy some space even though she was extremely worried about where Wendy might be at the moment. She had tried not to panic, but she had known that Wendy did not act that way. At 6 a.m., a sanitation worker walking his routine route through a commercial warehouse complex in the Northwest Dade area had contacted Miami police after noticing something unusual in the parking lot between two cars. As he had gotten closer, he had come across a woman wearing a blue evening gown lying face down in a pool of blood. The forensic experts had been stunned when they had arrived at the scene and had seen blood splattered on a nearby vehicle. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been struck multiple times with a heavy object, leaving her body disfigured beyond recognition. Although no weapon had been found at the scene, the deceased had been quickly identified as Wendy Trapaga thanks to a driver's license and a wallet containing identifying items found next to her. When Miriam had received the devastating news of her daughter's death, she had been plunged into a deep depression. Tears streaming down her face, Miriam, who had lost her husband, now had to deal with the sudden loss of her daughter. As the detectives had worked to determine the cause of Wendy's death, Miriam had received a call from Wendy's husband, Michelle, asking for any updates on Wendy. Miriam had been speechless and had struggled to convey to Michelle that Wendy was no longer alive. A detective had intervened, taking over the call to inform Michelle that they would be visiting his home to discuss the matter in detail. Michelle had been completely stunned and unable to speak. The police had taken Michelle to the police station to gather more information. During a 14-hour interrogation, Michelle had recounted the events of the evening leading up to Wendy's tragic death. As they had left the hotel and driven home around 3 a.m., Michelle and Wendy had gotten into an argument over drinking. During the argument, Wendy had unexpectedly admitted to Michelle that she was not pregnant, which had added to the tension of the argument. As they had approached their apartment, Michelle had decided to go inside to give them both time to calm down, leaving Wendy in the car. That had been the last time he had seen Wendy. The autopsy report later revealed that Wendy had died from being repeatedly beaten with a blunt object, causing 15 to 20 severe injuries to her face and neck. Her face had been unrecognizable due to the injuries. There had also been signs of strangulation. Investigators had also found strange DNA on Wendy's dress. A physical examination had revealed that Wendy had had alcohol and sedatives in her system. Her estimated time of death had been between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Some strange points had also been discovered. Wendy had been found without shoes, but her feet had been clean. In addition, there had been no injuries to her hands and feet, suggesting that she might not have resisted during the attack, or that she might have been unconscious or restrained. The medical examiner had also confirmed that Wendy had not been pregnant at the time of her death, raising further questions about the reason behind her lie. Authorities had found a new lead. They had discovered that Michelle had made a phone call at 3:15 a.m. the day his wife had died. detectives followed up on a crucial lead and discovered that Michel's last call had been made to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When informed of Wendy's death, Yolanda shared her love story with the police. She admitted to having had deep feelings for Michel and was heartbroken by his sudden passing. Despite attempts to contact him, he remained unresponsive until the fall of 2002 when he returned her call. When questioned, Michel admitted to having had an affair with another woman but maintained that he had no feelings for Wendy. He said that he still loved Yolanda and hoped to reunite with her. Yolanda, who still loved Michel, trusted him again and hoped that this would rekindle their romance. However, Michel continued to live a double life. The investigation was hampered by the lack of solid evidence, including DNA, fingerprints, surveillance camera footage, or even a murder weapon. All they had were unsubstantiated statements. About 2 months after Wendy's death, Michel reemerged as a prime suspect in the case. After being caught planning to cash in Wendy's life insurance policy, questions were raised about the true motives of Michel, who was the primary beneficiary of the policy. After this discovery, detectives suspected that Michel had a strong financial motive, seeing as the insurance policy was worth $1 million. The investigation team continued to pursue this theory. On the other hand, an unexpected aspect of Michel's personal history was revealed during the investigation. Michel had previously been arrested and charged with armed robbery. He was also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm and possession of drugs. 3 years after Wendy's death, detectives decided to interview Yolanda again, suspecting that she had more information than she had previously disclosed. After Wendy's death, Michel and Yolanda reunited and moved in together, but their life together was not a happy one. When Yolanda was brought in for questioning, law enforcement officers presented evidence that Yolanda had been the one who had funded Michel and Wendy's vacation after they had married. The police forced Yolanda to reveal the truth by warning her of the consequences of lying. Yolanda gradually opened up to the police. According to her testimony, when Yolanda and Michel resumed their relationship in the fall, Michel told her that he had to marry Wendy because Wendy was pregnant. However, in reality, Michel was indifferent to Wendy and planned to get rid of her to get the $1 million insurance money. Michel and Yolanda's ultimate plan was to kill Wendy and take her huge insurance money. Yolanda was blinded by her love for Michel and decided to go along with Michel's plan. The only thing she cared about was that Michel would reunite with her. According to the following testimony, after failing to get rid of Wendy during the holiday, Michel decided to take drastic action. Michel had laced Wendy's drink with a sedative in their hotel room. When Wendy began to fall asleep, Michel took her outside and put her in the car. In the middle of the night, Michel went to Yolanda's house and asked her to let him use her car. Michel then went to a parking lot far from the residential area in Northwest Dade and asked Yolanda to stay in the car for a while. Yolanda then witnessed Michel returning to her car with blood on his hands and a crowbar. They continued to Biscayne Bay, where Michel removed the murder weapon and washed away the evidence of the crime. Yolanda then drove Michel back to the residence she shared with Wendy, where Michel disposed of his bloody clothes. However, Yolanda's testimony may have been unreliable. Yolanda may have been more directly involved in the murder of Michel's wife. If Michel had not used the crowbar to kill his wife, it was possible that Yolanda herself was responsible for the brutality and disfigurement of Wendy's body. Unfortunately, the truth of this case may have remained unknown due to Yolanda's immunity agreement that protected her from arrest or prosecution. This was used by Michel's attorney to place the blame entirely on Yolanda in order to protect his client. However, after deliberating for just 2.5 hours, the jury convicted Michel Escoto of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. While Wendy's family finally felt that justice had been served after years of waiting, they were not entirely satisfied that Yolanda Cirillo would continue to walk free. Summer camp was approaching and Nicky Verstappen was still not sure if he really wanted to go or not. The year before, he did not go because he was scared of getting homesick and his parents supported his decision to stay back home. Nicky Verstappen preferred to spend summers at home in the town of Heibloem in the south of the Netherlands. That way he could always go to visit friends, play games with his younger sister, Fem, Kay or cuddle and love up to his dog. He would always miss his dog anytime he left home for the summer camp. In the summer of 1998, even though Nicky Verstappen felt unsure about going to summer camp, he still felt that he had to go. He felt he was not 10 years old anymore, he was 11 years and was growing up. After he told his mother that he was not too sure about summer camp, she encouraged him and said that once he was there, he would have a lot of fun. Since his best friend was going too, Nicky felt everything would be okay. After concluding to go, Nicky Verstappen began to pack his necessities, not forgetting to include his favorite red and white pajamas, which was an official merchandise Ajax, his favorite soccer team from Amsterdam. It was gifted to him as a Christmas present because of his love for anything that had to do with Ajax logo and colors. In fact, most of Nicky Verstappen's room was designed with everything Ajax from color red to white. The day of summer camp came and Nicky picked up his bag, looked at his room for the last time and left. Sadly, he would never get to see the poster of Jerry Litmanen hanging against the wall of his room ever again. Nicky Verstappen was born on the 13th of March, 1987 to Peter and Bert Verstappen in Heibloem in the district of Limburg, the Netherlands. He had a loving family and was the eldest of 2 children. Nicky and his younger sister, Femke, loved to play together. Nicky, who lived in a small community of 800 people, would frequently cycle all over his hometown of Heibloem. This made many people know him. He was described as friendly and a laid-back young kid. He was also known to be a happy and well-adjusted young man. His mother described him as spontaneous and sporty. At the time, when people think of Nicky Verstappen, it was hard not to recollect the Amsterdam soccer team. Ajax, Nicky was practically a die-hard fan who would never miss a match. Nicky was said to have played soccer himself, and he also was known to be a good player. The annual summer camp for the 8 to 12 years olds came, and on Saturday, the 8th of August, 1998, Nicky Verstappen and 36 other school children from his school took the bus on a 45-minute journey from Heibloem to the town of Brunsum in order to take part in the children's summer camp being held on the De Heikop camping grounds on the Brunsummerheide. It was known that every kid from Heibloem had the opportunity to attend this summer camp every year. Nicky Verstappen, who had encouraged himself to go because of his best friend, got a bit disappointed when his best friend pulled out and decided to stay back home at the last minute. Nicky, however, decided to still go for the summer camp. He stayed on the bus as he waved his friend goodbye. On arrival at the De Heikop camping grounds, the children were divided into their various tent groups. All 37 kids were split into 10 tents, while the 4 remaining tents were shared among the 12 camp leaders. According to camp tradition, each group had to name their tents. The name was also the name of their team. Nicky Verstappen's tent, which he shared with 4 other boys his age who were his friends, was named Night Riders. Just like his mother promised, the first day of summer camp was a lot of fun with games and team-building activities. Later that night, they all gathered around a campfire while one of the leaders narrated scary ghost stories. Around 10 p.m., the kids were sent to bed while the camp leader stayed up until midnight eating and drinking. Summer camp started off on a great path. Everyone retired to their tents for the night, feeling happy with the anticipation of a more exciting day, as there were a lot of fun-filling activities planned for the following day. Around 5 a.m. on the 10th of August 1998, one of Nicky Verstappen's tentmate woke up to go use the toilet. At that time, the remaining tentmates, including Nicky, were still sleeping. Around 6 a.m., another kid from the Night Riders tent woke up and realized Nicky Verstappen was gone. Their initial thoughts was that he had gone to the toilet. However, 2 hours later, at 8 a.m., when the trumpet for breakfast time was played and Nicky had not still returned, his tent mates became worried. They then told their camp leaders that Nicky had gone out of their tent since 6 a.m. and had not returned. Everyone at the campsite, including the campers and camp leaders, started looking for Nicky Verstappen all over the campsite. They searched for him and called out his name numerous times, but he could not be found. Since Nicky Verstappen had been unsure of coming to summer camp, the leaders thought that he had run away. His parents in Heibloem were then called and told that he had disappeared from the campsite and his whereabouts could not be located. This came as a shock to Nicky's parents. His mother, Berthie, versed up and sensed something was wrong. To her, she knows her son would never opt and leave the camp without informing anyone, since he was quite nervous about going away from home in the first place. It did not make any sense that he would go off on his own. Berthie and Peter then quickly left Heibloem and traveled down to the campsite to look for their son. When they got to the campsite, Berthie noticed that Nicky's shoes were still in the tent. She felt if he had planned to run away, definitely he would have worn his shoes. Nicky's parents then joined the camp leaders to search all over the campsite, desperately calling Nicky's name, but unfortunately there was no answer. By midday, they came to a conclusion to call in the police. Later that afternoon, the search party had grown significantly. There was a massive turnout of volunteers, which were mostly friends and family from Heibloem, as well as from the local town of Brunson. They took turns to wait at Nicky's tent and to go out and look for Nicky in the surrounding bushes and fields. The search party frantically looked for Nicky. The police, to a great extent, interrogated all the camp leaders, and went to all the homes surrounding the campsite to ask if residents had maybe come across an 11-year-old boy. But it didn't yield anything. Even though Nikki's family insisted that something was seriously wrong, the search party had no real sense of panic. The only general feeling they had was that Nicky Verstappen had left the campsite by himself and had got lost in the woods. They believed he was okay and were expecting him to be found alive and well. The day of the search appeared to have been one of the hottest days of the whole summer of 1998. It was 95 degrees and it made the search even more exhausting. Camp leaders took turns to look for Nicky, while others kept the kids at the campsite occupied with activities. In the evening, armed forces were contacted to join in the search, while the kids were sent to their tents like nothing happened. While they slept, the military vehicles and searchers frantically called out Nicky's name into the darkness of the night. By the next morning, on Tuesday, Nicky was still nowhere to be found. So the camp leaders felt there was no need for camping anymore if one of them was lost. They then decided to cancel the camp. Every kid was placed in a bus and taken back home to Heibel M, while the search party intensified their search efforts. The more they searched for Nicky Verstappen, the more it became clear that he didn't run away. The police used their dogs for the search as well, and an aerial search of the campsite was done using a plane. All efforts to find Nicky yielded no results, and by sunset, the search party was running out of daylight. Finally, around 9 p.m. on Tuesday, August 11th, 1998, Nicky Verstappen's uncle, who was part of the search party, noticed something laying underneath a small pine tree. On getting closer, he saw the lifeless body of 11-year-old Nicky Verstappen. Nicky was found in a pine grove on the Shinveldug in Landgraf, less than a mile away from the campsite. He was wearing his red Ajax pajama pants and blue underpants and was naked from the waist up. His pajamas pants, which he got as a Christmas present from the previous year, were turned inside out and the front was placed to the back. Nicky had sustained a wound to his head, but at first glance, the wound did not look serious enough to have caused his death. Even though he was found in a pine grove, close to farmlands and bushes, Nicky's feet were clean. He seemed like he did not walk to the place where he was found. People believed that he was killed somewhere else, and his body was carried down to the place he was found. The spot Nicky Verstappen was found was near a parking lot that was known for where homosexual men would meet for secret sex. Aside that, movement around that area was limited. By midnight, Nicky Verstappen's body was taken to a mortuary in Maastricht, about 30 minutes away from the campsite. The people of Heibloem came together to assist Nicky's family in arranging a memorial service for him. The memorial service took place at Heibloem Sports Fields on Saturday, August 15, 1998, a week after he left home for summer camp. Since Nicky was wildly known in Heibloem, 600 people attended his funeral. His love for Ajax was recognized at his funeral. His coffin was covered with the red Ajax flag, which was something he would have loved. His family would never remain the same again as they were left in a state of shock and grief. Nicky's parents felt guilty for encouraging their son to go for summer camp, even when he confided in them that he was unsure of the trip. Who killed Nicky Verstappen? His family wanted answers and closure. Somebody needed to be held accountable for killing their son and brother, but the police had no leads whatsoever. Seeing that it was unlikely for Nicky to have gone off with a stranger, the police interviewed the camp leaders again. Unfortunately, nothing that could help solve the case was discovered. Nicky's post-mortem examination took place 3 days after his death. Since he was murdered in the summer of the holiday period, Nicky's family had to wait for 2 months before the results of the autopsy was released. According to the autopsy report, Nicky Verstappen was drugged and his body showed signs of sexual abuse. However, medical examiner was unable to determine a cause of death. Due to this, a second autopsy was carried out, and its result had the same conclusion with the first. There was a possibility that Nicky was sexually assaulted, but his cause of death could not be determined. Even though suffocation was suggested as his cause of death, there was not enough evidence to prove it once and for all. Following Nicky's murder, an extensive investigation was carried out, but the case went cold and would remain unsolved for 20 years. The police had to use the evidence they have. Close to the parking lot, about 100 yards from where Nicky Verstappen was found, a tissue containing semen, a cigarette butt and beer bottle top were retrieved. The forensics then compiled a DNA profile of a person other than Nicky, though it was not definite that the tissue was related to Nicky's murder case, since people often met in the parking lot and have sex in the woods. In 1997, a year before Nicky Verstappen's murder, a DNA database was created at the National Forensics Institute of the Netherlands. At the time, DNA testing was the new forensic technology and tests were a little bit restricted. Also, any DNA testing on the database could only be handled by the prosecutor and not the police. At that time, the police did not have their own database and they did not have first-hand access to the national database without an approval from the prosecutor. This made the process of quickly finding a killer somewhat slow and difficult. During the investigation of Nikki Versteppen's murder, DNA samples of 40 men were taken. The men included camp leaders, some men from a campsite nearby and other male visitors in the area at the time of Nikki's death. However, none of the DNA matched the profile found in the tissue at the crime scene. Even if the retrieved tissue with semen was probably a leftover of a sexual encounter that had nothing to do with Nikki's death, the investigators still could not strike out the evidence. Later in the investigation, there was a glimmer of hope when a single hair, similar in color to that of Nikki's, was found in the trunk of a car which belonged to one of the camp leaders. After the hair sample was sent to the UK for DNA testing, it was however discovered that it did not belong to Nikki. Immediately, the autopsy results were out. The first person of interest was Joe Barton, an 80-year-old founder of the camp Nikki and his classmates went. Joe Barton was the former principal of Nikki's school in High Blame. He had lost his job after he was convicted of child sexual abuse in the 1950s. During interrogation, he had also confessed that he was near Nikki Versteppen's tent at 6 a.m. on the morning of his disappearance. But he did not go there for Nikki. He said he went there to check on one of the boys who had burned his hand the night before. Joe's Barton's alibi was that when he woke up at 5 a.m., he cleaned his tent and then went to check on the boy who burned his hand, after which he then drove back to Hebloem to attend the funeral of a friend who had died. He claimed to have heard about Nikki Versteppen's disappearance at the funeral and went straight back to the camp. Joe Barton was on the police radar for some time, and this was because he exhibited strange behavior during the search for Nikki Versteppen. He kept steering the search in the direction of the place where Nikki's body was found. He also gave the information that the parking lot near the crime scene was a place where men often meet for sex. The police was uncomfortable about Joe Barton. They decided to look into his background. Even though he was a respected member of his community, he had been convicted for child sexual assault and was imprisoned for 3 months before he was let go and allowed to work with kids again. Several years later, photos of young boys who were shirtless or in their underpants were discovered on him, though there were no proofs that he further molested any male child at the time. However, after Nikki Versteppen's death, a 15-year-old girl came forward and said that she had every reason to believe Joe Barton had sexually molested her when she attended summer camp earlier that year in 1998. She claimed she was unwell one evening and Joe Barton had given her medication that turned out to be sleeping drugs for adults. She said when she woke up, her clothes were messy and different from the way they were when she went to bed. The girl also claimed to have experienced lower abdominal pain and discomfort. The police could not do anything about her confession since she did not report the incident earlier. After much interrogation, Joe Barton could not be arrested due to lack of sufficient evidence to pin him to the kidnapping and murder of Nikki Versteppen. A reward of 250,000 guilders was offered for any lead that could bring the suspect to justice. As time went, Nikki's family became frustrated as they sensed lack of urgency in solving their son's murder. They resorted to a well-known television crime reporter at the time, Peter Davries, and asked him to help them to solve the mystery surrounding their son's death. Peter Davries agreed to help them look into the case. Over the years, his involvement in the case turned out to be a salvation for Nikki's family. Peter Davries launched a campaign on behalf of the Versteppen family, and the reward money was doubled to 500,000 guilders by unknown business people. In April 1999, the first in-depth documentary about Nikki's murder case was broadcast nationally. The documentary talked about Joe Barton's child sexual assault in the past. It brought up questions like, why was he allowed to work with children after being a convicted sex offender? The documentary seemed to put pressure on the police to investigate Joe Barton further. This divided the small community of High Blame. Nikki's case threatened to tear the community apart. While some people wanted to protect the founder of the camp, some people supported Nikki's family in their quest to find out the truth, even if it meant asking confronting questions. As time went by, majority of the people in High Blame chose to stay away from Nikki's family. They believed the Versteppens were out on a witch hunt. Nikki's family only held on to a handful of faithful friends who supported them through the case. In July of 1999, Nikki Versteppens was ruled unsolved. The next month, in August, Bertie and Peter Verstappen had an opportunity to meet with Queen Beatrix, the former Queen of the Netherlands. They handed her a letter, which was an official complaint about the slow investigation in the death of their son. Due to this, efforts were subsequently intensified by the prosecutor in my asterisk to solving the case. In 2001, Nikki's grandparents and the town of Brunsum silently built a monument for Nikki at the spot where his body was found. This didn't make Nicky's parents feel any better. His mother, Bertie, would always light a candle in their family home every morning as soon as she woke up. She did this for 20 years. In an interview with Peter DeVries, she said, "I wake up at night and hear his voice. He calls me. I get up and go to look for Nicky, but he is no longer there." Their happy and complete family of 4 had become an unhappy, incomplete, and broken family of 3. Since answers were not forthcoming at the time, Bertie, who did not let that stop her, had promised on national TV to bring the killer of her child to justice as long as she was still alive. In February of 2001, Bertie and Peter Versteppen wrote a public letter to the Minister of Justice asking for help on their son's case. They claimed to be at the mercy of the police and the legal systems, but they have no answers. The legal system then decided to act as there appeared to have been a total breakdown in trust by the people of Hyblum. The general public were getting disappointed at the police and the legal systems for not giving answers as to who killed Nicky Versteppen. In that same year, the case was renewed and a second opinion task force was given the case to investigate from scratch. On the 29th of June 2001, the investigative team was able to determine the time of Nicky's death. His time of death was estimated to have been between 2 p.m. on the 10th of August or 9 a.m. on the 11th of August. It means Nicky Versteppen was alive for at least 8 hours before he was murdered. New DNA technology also discovered that there were little drops of blood on Nicky's pajamas. One of the drops was tested for foreign DNA, but it turned out to be that of Nicky. Further investigation revealed many mistakes made by the first set of investigators that made the case become cold for some time. One of the mistakes was that these investigators focused on the scene where Nicky was found. They used that spot as the crime scene, forgetting that Nicky's feet were clean when he was found, which suggested that he did not walk to that place himself. He was carried away from the main crime scene and dumped at the spot he was found. The first investigation did not look for possible evidence beyond the pine tree where Nicky was found. Even the campsite where Nicky was last seen was not properly considered for possible clues that could pinpoint the killer. As time unfolds, Stu Spartan was not the only suspect in the case. In 1998, at the time that Nicky and his friends were camping, there appeared to have been another group from the Roald Duck Seminary who pitched their tents nearby. A man named Roald Duck's chef had piqued the interest of the police, and this was because he had once had an inappropriate contact with a child before. They believed he was someone who would do it again. On the morning of Nicky Versteppen's disappearance, Roald the chef was not at the campsite. When questioned, he appeared to have no alibi for his whereabouts at the time. However, he died in 1999 before the police could find enough evidence to arrest him. Also, a man simply known as Vim was another person of interest at the time. Vim was a sex offender from a town nearby. Different witnesses spotted him near the High-Cop campsite in a dark-colored vehicle around August 10, 1998. He was questioned by the police in 2001, 2003, 2006, and 2007. Anytime a witness came forward pointing a finger at him. Unfortunately, there was no sufficient evidence to pin him to the crime, and in 2007, he died at the age of 64. Until his death, Vim had said he never killed Nicky Versteppen. Martin A., the German serial killer, was someone the police could not afford to overlook in this case. He had killed 3 boys and had sexually molested at least 40 children between 1992 and 2001. Martin A. was known as the Masked Man or the Black Man, and this is because he used to wear black clothing and a creepy black mask. His victims were usually hunted by him at campsites or in children's homes. Since the Hiccup campsite was located close to the Dutch-German border and one of Ney's proven crimes was committed in the Netherlands, he was considered a serious suspect. However, when he was eventually arrested for all his crimes in 2001, Martin A. denied any involvement in Nicky Verstappen's murder. As the investigation progresses, the police had quite a number of suspects on their list. The likes of Michel Fournier and Mark Hoffman, who were sex offenders at the time, were considered suspects to Nicky Verstappen's homicide case, but thorough investigation vindicated them, and they were never charged with his murder. In 2004, Peter DeVries became aware of new testing techniques in the science of DNA. He then informed the public and told the police to re-examine the blood found on Nicky Verstappen's clothing. In 2005, an anonymous person placed letters on Nicky's memorial in Bronson, claiming to have been responsible for killing him. Investigators traced the letters to a 36-year-old man, but it turned out to be a false confession. The man was a psychiatric patient who had severe mental health issues. His therapist explained that he had written the letters as a way of getting attention. The man was placed in custody for 2 weeks for vandalizing Nicky Verstappen's grave. In 2008, when it seemed like all hope was lost, detectives announced that foreign DNA had been found on Nicky's pajamas pants and his underpants. Previous suspects in the case were all retested, but there were still no matches to the DNA found. Nevertheless, Nicky's family was positive. It might seem like another dead end, but the discovery of the foreign DNA profile meant there was proof of a male individual being in physical contact with Nicky Verstappen before his death. Nicky's family prayed and hoped that the perpetrator would be found before he could hurt any other person. In the year 2010, Nicky Verstappen's sister, Femke, who was in her 20s by then, made a public appeal to every man in the community to participate in a DNA testing so that the family could have some sense of closure. After the appeal, the police gathered a list of over 100 men. These men were initially part of the search party and camp management. 80 out of 114 men agreed to provide saliva swabs. Even though it was quite a high number of turnouts for the DNA analysis, Peter de Vries took to the media again to encourage people to be partakers of the DNA tests. It seemed a lot of these men were scared of leaving their DNA samples because they do not want to be caught for a past crime. However, after Peter de Vries explained that their DNAs would only be used for the Nicky Verstappen's case, additional 40 men came forward. After carrying out a comprehensive test on the retrieved DNA samples, there was still no match to the DNA found on Nicky's clothing. In a desperate attempt to find the truth, the remains of Just Barton, who had died in 2003, were exhumed for testing. There was hope at that point since Just Barton had been the strongest suspect throughout the years. However, many people became surprised when the DNA of Just Barton did not match the DNA found on Nicky Verstappen's clothes. In the early days of 2012, Nicky Verstappen's homicide case was transferred to a cold case team. The new investigators went through Nicky's case file from the very beginning to end. After that, they located a group of 1,500 males, all of whom had ties to the region near the campsite where Nicky Verstappen was last seen. The individuals on the list were either camp employees, residents of the neighborhood, or officially charged sex offenders. But once again, they were out of luck. The police did not give up easily. They renewed their request for public assistance in 2017. They requested over 20,000 DNA samples in order to perform kinship analysis. By this, investigators would have more information about the killer's relatives, which would greatly reduce the scope of their search. In the long run, only 15,000 volunteers participated. However, the size of this DNA dragnet operation was unprecedented in Dutch history. Given that there was nothing more to be done, it was a long shot but also the last option. Bulk DNA sweeping is a significant project and numerous ethical issues have been brought up in relation to it. Most people believe that cooperating was a no-brainer if they had nothing to conceal, and their DNA profile may help investigators identify the killer of a young child. Authorities sent mails to all the men requesting new DNA samples. Police would attempt to persuade them to assist if there were no answers from them by visiting them at home. One of the men named Jos Breck, who was supposed to provide a sample, did not show up. 2 police officers went to his house, but he wasn't there. The man, according to his relatives, traveled to France in February of 2012 and did not return. Jos Breck's family reported him missing in April. He had vanished from his home and presumably ran away before the police could find him and extract his DNA. Authorities investigated this man's past to learn who he was because they had concerns about him. When Nicky Verstappen was killed, Jos Breck was 35 years old. He resided in Simpelveld with his mother, which is about 12 miles from the campsite. He was a committed scout member and frequently served as a camp leader as well. He had also spent some years providing childcare in Brunsum. He had once been involved in a case of sexual abuse of 2 10-year-old boys in 1985. Despite making a confession to the crime, he was not found guilty. He only got a 2-year probationary period and his name was never added to the list of sex offenders. That was why he evaded detection when local police conducted a DNA search of all sex offenders. His name was never mentioned. On August 10, 1998, Jos Brecht was in the immediate area of Nicky's disappearance. Around midnight on Tuesday, August 11, 1998, police stopped him while he was cycling on a road close to the crime site. Few hours before he was seen by the police, Nicky Verstappen's corpse had just been discovered, and at the time the police saw Jos Brecht, Nicky's body was being transported from the campsite to Maastricht for the autopsy. When the cops questioned him about why he was out cycling at that time, Jos Brecht responded that he was delivering letters to scout members because it was too hot to have done so during the day. The explanation seemed reasonable to the officers because that particular day had been very hot. However, when he was questioned later during investigation, he provided a different explanation. Child pornography was discovered on his personal computer in August 1998. The same month when Nicky Verstappen was murdered, But once again, Jos Brecht only got a warning. One of the 15,000 DNA samples provided to authorities during the bulk DNA search in 2017 revealed a close match to the foreign DNA found on Nicky Verstappen. The DNA sample belonged to a relative of the individual whose DNA was found on Nicky's clothes. That person happened to be related to the missing Jos Brecht. In order to create a DNA profile, police asked Jos Brecht's family if he had left behind a hairbrush or toothbrush as they were getting closer to solving the case. His family assisted the authorities and provided them with some of his personal belongings. Finally, after 20 painful long years, all the effort paid off. At the start of June 2018, the forensics discovered a 100 perfect match between Jos Brecht's and the DNA found on Nicky's pajamas and underpants. Detectives were, however, requested to keep the new information to themselves in order to avoid alerting the offender. The investigators now began a massive global search for Jos Brecht. Jos Brecht's last known location was in the Vosges mountain region of northern France, where he served as a survival expert who guided nature expeditions into the mountains. Keep in mind that he was an experienced scout member who knew what he was doing. When Jos Brecht departed the Vosges, no one knew where he had gone because he had not used his credit cards or his phone. Police discovered that he had improved his survival skills and had made preparations to vanish and live off the grid. His computer search history demonstrated that he was well prepared because he had done extensive study on small towns throughout Europe, places where Dutch news would not be reported. According to law enforcement, the only way to get him out of his hiding spot was to ask the public for assistance. On August 22, 2018, they revealed at a press conference that DNA samples from Jos Brecht's personal items matched the DNA discovered on Nicky Verstappen's clothing. They also disclosed his name and current age. Due to privacy laws in the Netherlands and the rule that everyone is considered innocent until proven guilty, it is customary to only use the first letter of a surname. However, this instance was unique because it required assistance from law officials to find Jos Brecht. The public appeal worked because the week following the press conference, a Dutch resident of northern Spain who had seen Jos Brecht's picture in the newspaper recognized him and called the police to report his whereabouts. Jos Brecht was living in a tent next to a commune house in the village of Castellterçol, north of Barcelona. 20 years after Nicky Verstappen's death, on August 26, 2018, Jos Brecht was taken into custody. The passport he had with him at the time of his arrest served as proof of his name. He was returned to the Netherlands on September 6, 2018 and appeared in court for the first time in December 2018. Peter de Vries rejoiced with Nicky Verstappen's family following the arrest of Jos Brecht. There was a strong feeling of relief and accomplishment. Jos Brecht had been questioned in 2001 regarding his presence close to the crime scene on the night Nicky's body was discovered, and he had confessed to child molestation in the past. In his words, he said, "Yes, I can imagine why you'd want to speak to me because I have had some brushes with the law in the past in connection with child abuse." This statement was not followed up on or a DNA sample taken. Jos Brecht was not on the sex offenders list, but he had effectively placed himself on it. This case would have been long solved if only the police had thoroughly looked into Jos Brecht back then. In December 2018, the trial commenced in Maastricht. Jos Brecht was charged with manslaughter rather than murder. Manslaughter is a less serious charge. There isn't enough evidence to prove that the murder was premeditated, as there would be in a murder case. Jos Brecht pled not guilty in court and defended himself, saying his DNA was found on Nicky's clothing because when he was walking close to the edge of a forest back at the camp area, he saw something in the distance and went to look out of curiosity, only for him to find Nicky's body. He said that he had checked for signs of life, brushed leaves off the body, and then left without any other action because of his previous convictions. The prosecutor argued that a total of 27 traces of Jos Brecht's DNA had been found on Nicky's body, including on his underwear. Jos Brecht still maintained his innocence, saying he had no idea how his DNA ended up on Nicky's underwear. After trial, Jos Brecht was found guilty, and on the 28th of January 2022, an appeal court convicted him on a charge of manslaughter and sentenced him to 16 years imprisonment. Will Nicky Verstappen's family ever find satisfaction? Even though they may have some answers, their son will always be 11 years old, even as his peers age and progress through life. Every day, they are plagued by countless unanswered questions, such as, would Nicky have grown up to realize his goal of playing professional soccer? They are wounded and they no longer believe in people. Femke Verstappen continues her mother's custom of lighting a candle for Nicky each day and keeping fresh flowers around the house, even though she is an adult with a kid of her own. Every day, hundreds of thousands of individuals go missing worldwide. Although many are quickly found or return on their own, about a third are discovered deceased eventually. The remainder disappear without a trace, their fates enshrouded in mystery. Mysterious and unsolved cases of disappearances frequently captivate the public and become the basis for detective novels or fantasy films. Yet sometimes reality can be more terrifying than fiction. The disappearance of 19-year-old student Katie Poore stands out as particularly unique. Her case was so baffling that even NASA experts participated in the effort to find her. Despite their best efforts, she could not be found alive. This shocking event deeply affected the nation, especially the normally peaceful town of Moose Lake, where Katie resided along with other students. Katie Elizabeth Puyo was born on February 28, 1980 in the quaint town of Duluth in St. Louis County, Minnesota. She was the second child in a loving and ordinary family. She grew up with her older brother, and they shared a strong bond since childhood. When Katie started school, the family relocated to Carleton County and settled in Barnum. Katie was known for being sociable, active, and highly creative. She studied vocals, played guitar, and eventually began performing in a music band where she happily showcased her talents. Katie also had a deep love for animals. She volunteered at a shelter for stray cats and dogs and participated actively in cleaning and beautifying local parks. Her beauty was well recognized. In high school, she even participated in a city beauty contest where she achieved second place. After high school graduation, she attended college and moved to Moose Lake, a quiet and picturesque town in the same county as her family. By that time, Katie had been dating Mark for a couple of years. They both went to university and planned to get married. The couple rented a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood. Katie attended law school to study criminal law while her fiancé focused on computer technology. They both worked part-time jobs to support themselves financially, save for their wedding, and avoid relying on their parents. Katie secured a job at a gas station near a busy highway where she took night shifts several times a week. She enjoyed this work because it allowed her to manage her schedule efficiently. However, her parents were concerned about her safety since she was alone at the shop during nighttime along the highway connecting several large cities. A place bustling with traffic around the clock with various people visiting the gas station and store. Despite their concerns, Katie reassured them that there was no need for worry due to surveillance cameras everywhere and the presence of a nearby popular diner that remained crowded most of the time. On May 26, 1999, 19-year-old Katie Puyo went to the store for her regular shift. It appeared to be an ordinary day. She switched with her colleague who had worked during the day and took up her position behind the cash register. Around midnight, a woman came by the gas station, filled her tank with gasoline, and walked into the store to pay and buy some snacks. After gathering her items, she approached the cash register but found it unattended. Confused, she waited for a while, then went to the utility room and called out. There was no answer. This felt strange since the store was fully operational. Lights on, doors unlocked. When no clerk appeared after 10 minutes, she decided to contact the police. Police arrived promptly, examined the store and its surroundings, but found nothing unusual or alarming. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood traces. Everything was in place, including a good amount of money in the cash register. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Initially, it was assumed that Katie might have left voluntarily due to an urgent matter. However, all her personal belongings were still in the store. Keys to her house and car included. Her vehicle was parked outside. This posed a question. How did Katie leave on foot? Abandoning her car and purse seemed unlikely, pointing towards a more troubling scenario. The police reached out to Katie's parents to report her disappearance and inquire if they had any clues about her whereabouts or any reasons she might have abruptly left. Mr. and Mrs. Puyo assured them that Katie was always responsible and would not abandon her duties as she highly valued her job. Katie's fiancé corroborated their statements, expressing his utter confusion regarding her sudden disappearance. At this point, Katie Puyo was officially reported missing and the store treated as a potential crime scene. The investigation kicked off with a review of footage from 4 surveillance cameras installed in the store, each one positioned strategically to cover every angle inside. The initial hours of Katie's shift revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing suspicious occurred during those early hours. Around 11 p.m., a girl walked into the store. She chatted with Katie for about 10 minutes, but didn't purchase anything. From their conversation, it was clear that she was either an acquaintance or friend of the missing student. Approximately half an hour later, they entered the store. He looked around but quickly left. Shortly after, he came back in. At moment, Katie had gone to the back room and it seemed he might have been observing her from outside through the glass door. He re-entered the store and headed directly towards the back room. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in that section of the store, so what happened next is unclear. A few minutes later, Katie and this unknown man emerged from the back room together and moved toward the exit. The man was walking behind Katie, holding her by the hair with one hand and pressing his other hand against her back. It was evident that he was threatening her with a weapon, likely a knife or gun, and forcing her to leave with him. Essentially, this constituted an abduction from her workplace. This information was crucial. However, further investigation faced challenges because there were no cameras at the gas station adjacent to the store or in its parking lot. Consequently, determining where the suspect took Katie, his vehicle details, and his direction of travel was impossible. Given that the gas station and store were situated on an isolated stretch near a busy highway with no places to hide or go except along the road, it's likely someone would have seen if he had forcefully led her away on foot and contacted law enforcement. Therefore, it's presumed that he took her to the parking lot and placed her in his car. Another problem arose from the poor quality of the video footage from existing cameras. It was 1999 after all, and having any cameras at all back then was quite fortunate. The videos were grainy black and white images that rendered identifying features unclear, making it difficult to create a facial composite swiftly. Law enforcement and volunteers who joined the search scoured several miles around the gas station and store looking for possible clues, but found nothing conclusive. Investigators also interviewed Melinda, the sole witness who spoke with Katie shortly before she vanished. Melinda confirmed she was a close friend and fellow student working part-time at a nearby diner. She mentioned seeing a suspicious man harassing both a customer inside the diner and another woman in the parking lot earlier on, suggesting to each woman that they should get better acquainted. Both declined his suggestions and walked away separately. Melinda's work shift ended at 11 p.m. As she locked the door and prepared to go home, a man showed up again. He approached, asking if the restaurant was closing and what time it would open in the morning. Melinda found his question odd and hurried to inform Katie about the visitor, suggesting they call the police. Katie, however, reassured her that everything was fine since the store had plenty of cameras. Melinda then remembered the man drove a black Ford F-150 pickup truck. They left the parking lot around the same time, but he overtook her quickly. She recalled part of his license plate, 5 and 57, and the letter Y. This was an important clue, but in the late 90s, without a national electronic database, locating the vehicle took time. Both Melinda and another witness at a gas station provided only rough descriptions of the suspect. Given it was dark outside, they couldn't get a clear look at him. They described him as a white male with long blonde hair, aged between 35 and 40. He spoke without an accent and wore a baseball cap that partially hid his face. The surveillance videos were not much help either due to low resolution. For the first time, police sought help from NASA specialists to enhance image quality and reveal more details of the suspect's face. Using advanced technology meant for astronomical purposes, they reconstructed a clearer image of him. The task was complicated, strange angles, as he never looked directly at any camera in the footage. Still, authorities were satisfied with the final composite portrait. This portrait was distributed to police stations statewide and frequently shown on news channels. Citizens were urged to stay vigilant and report any sightings of individuals matching this description or driving a similar vehicle. Soon after, police began receiving dozens of calls daily, though most turned out to be false leads. About a couple of days later, authorities detained a 25-year-old man who bore a strong resemblance to the individual, the composite portrait. Additionally, he had a prior criminal record for robbery and harassment. However, he was soon released due to a notable distinguishing feature: a large tattoo covering his entire arm, which the suspect in the video did not have. An important detail was that the man who escorted Katie out of the store wore a Yankee baseball team t-shirt with the number 23. According to Melinda, when the suspect approached her in the parking lot, he was dressed differently. Yet upon reviewing the surveillance footage, she had no doubt it was him. A week later, a call came from Minneapolis. A worried man reported that the person in the portrait looked like his neighbor, who worked as a cleaner and drove a similar car. A couple of weeks ago, right around the time of the girl's abduction, this neighbor unexpectedly cut his long blonde hair and began growing a beard. This suspect turned out to be 50-year-old Donald Hutchinson. It was discovered that he had recently quit his job without any apparent reason, which raised suspicions. On the day of Katie's disappearance and the following day, he didn't go to work because he reported not feeling well. Former colleagues confirmed that he drove a black Ford F-150 with a license plate matching what police were looking for. Donald Aubin Hutchinson's real name is Donald Allen Blom. He was born in Minnesota in 1949 and grew up in a dysfunctional family where his father was an alcoholic who abused both him and his mother. As a teenager, Donald himself started drinking and displayed uncontrollable aggressive behavior that troubled everyone around him. Consequently, he was transferred to a special school for difficult children. At age 25, Blom was convicted and imprisoned after kidnapping and assaulting a 14-year-old girl. However, he served only 3 years before being released on parole. Shortly after, he was arrested again for assault and harassment, but received another short sentence. In 1983, Donald was arrested yet again. This time, he had kidnapped 2 teenage girls, taken them to a deserted area, and tied them to a tree. He assaulted one of the girls and strangled the other several times, then revived her, making it a game of life and death. Fortunately, a passerby walking with a dog heard their screams and saved them. Consequently, Blom served 9 years in prison. Upon his release, he changed his name, moved to another city, and avoided police attention for a long time. He got married after his release, and his wife bore him 4 children. On the surface, their family appeared happy. The man secured employment. However, his addiction to alcohol and substances turned him into a menace. His wife and children often suffered from his violence, but occasionally this monster sought other victims. Nobody was aware of Donald's criminal past. He went to great lengths to conceal it by changing his name and identity. He even altered his appearance by growing long hair and a beard that he sometimes shaved off. Initially, the police lacked solid grounds to detain him. They could only question him during their investigation. The suspect owned around 20 acres of land just 12 miles from the store where Katie was kidnapped. In fact, right after Katie's disappearance, the police had already visited him upon learning about his black pickup truck. Donald claimed that he had sold the vehicle and that its license plate differed from the one they saw. He even provided a document as proof, which later turned out to be fake. Following these findings, the police secured a search warrant for his house and land property. They discovered an unexpected surprise in a large barn where Donald attempted to hide his black Ford F-150 behind old junk and furniture. The license plate matched the one identified by Melinda. With this discovery, Donald's calm facade began to crack. Nonetheless, he continued denying any involvement in Katie's disappearance. Yet even with this significant lead, the pickup truck, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him at that point. The suspect's license plate was only a partial match, and there were neither witnesses nor video evidence confirming that Katie had been taken in that specific car. Consequently, the police shifted their focus to searching the house, aiming to find traces of the missing girl or even Katie herself. The interior was spotless. No blood traces, no signs of forcible confinement, and no clues linked to Katie's disappearance were found. However, inspecting the property posed challenges as it spanned over 24 acres and required more than a day's effort, along with significant resources. To address this, National Guard personnel and hundreds of volunteers joined in the search and investigation efforts. The first day yielded no results. By the end of the second day, however, police stumbled upon peculiar ashes suggesting that something had been burned or cremated over an extended period. Among these ashes were bone fragments, which criminologists meticulously collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. While most bones were animal remains, parts of a human skeleton were also discovered, including a tooth that warranted closer examination. Experts identified that the bones belonged to a young woman aged between 18 and 23 years old. However, DNA testing faced complications because prolonged exposure to high temperatures had destroyed much of the material. When criminologists from other states joined the investigation, they managed to extract a DNA fragment matching the DNA of the missing girl. Unfortunately, this crucial evidence was deemed only indirect and could not conclusively establish the suspect's guilt. Hence, it became imperative to analyze the tooth found among the ashes to determine if it belonged to Katie. It was revealed that this tooth contained a rare filling made of silicone and zirconium, an innovative dental material. Conversations with Katie's dentist confirmed this unusual filling. He immediately recognized his work since he had used materials obtained from an international dental conference on her just a week before she vanished. Though all collected evidence remained circumstantial collectively, a combination strong enough, it sufficed for law enforcement officials to arrest Donald and detain him until trial proceedings concluded. Thus unfolded developments leading up to his incarceration pending further proceedings. On June 22, 1999, the man immediately pleaded not guilty, sought legal counsel, and expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. During a more thorough examination of his belongings, law enforcement discovered multiple firearms for which he lacked permits. Shortly thereafter, Donald began confessing. He admitted to kidnapping Katie from the store, bringing her to his property where he strangled her and subsequently burning her body. However, he denied any coercion related to intimacy with the victim, attributing his inability to do so to the significant amount of alcohol and illegal substances he had consumed. Donald further claimed that he used only firewood and paper to incinerate the remains, but experts asserted that this method alone wouldn't suffice without additional fuel. That evening was marked by aimless driving around the neighborhood. Upon noticing Melinda at a gas station, Donald initially intended to follow her when she left, but then changed his mind. He overtook her and proceeded home to change clothes before heading back to the store where Katie worked. This accounts for discrepancies in eyewitness testimony regarding what he was wearing. 2 weeks later, Donald unexpectedly recanted his confession, asserting his innocence once again. He alleged that he had been coerced into confessing due to threats made against him and his wife. His wife attempted to support this claim during the trial by offering an alibi, asserting that he was at home with her throughout that evening and did not leave the residence. In a striking turn of events during the trial, 2 former victims from 1983 came forward. They testified about their experiences with Donald, depicting him as a ruthless sadist who had subjected them to torture and exploitation. The evidence presented along with the witness statements led the jury to unanimously declare the defendant guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of. Subsequently, Donald's wife admitted she lived in fear of her husband, habitually beat her and their children. She expressed that she felt compelled to provide him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. After disclosing, she changed her last name, took their children, and moved to another state where they wouldn't be known. On a related note, detectives working on this high-profile case suspected that Blom could be a serial rapist and murderer. They linked him to several unsolved crimes involving the disappearance of young girls under similar circumstances. Specifically, he was suspected in the strangling of Wilma Johnson, found in 1983, as well as the 1993 abduction and murder of student Holly Spangler. In 2021, Blom was transferred to a medium security prison at MCF Faribault. Conditions there were much more lenient, and he referred to it as a vacation. However, after complaints and protests from Katie's family, Blom was moved back to a high-security facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He passed away there on January 10, 2023, at age 73. Katie Pierce's death has been covered extensively in popular television documentaries about real crimes. HLN Channel aired a series called Forensic Files, which featured an episode titled Tooth or Consequences, based on Katie's story. The Discovery Channel released an episode from their series New Detectives titled Fatal Abduction, dedicated to this particular case. Additionally, in 2010, a documentary titled From the Ashes was produced using materials from the investigation. On October 1, 1993, 12-year-old Polly Kloss of Petaluma invited 2 friends for a sleepover. The evening proceeded smoothly until Polly's mother, Eva, was abruptly awoken by intense screaming. She soon discovered that her daughter had been kidnapped by an unknown assailant. Polly Hannah Kloss was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California. Her family comprised her father, Mark, her mother, Eva, and her younger sister, Annie. When she was very young, her parents separated. Following the separation, Polly and her sister went to live with their mother in Petaluma. Mark subsequently entered a new relationship, and Polly developed a positive relationship with his partner. This arrangement created a harmonious family dynamic, where Polly spent time with both parents without any issues. Polly is often described as a quiet and innocent child. Although she had friends, she was generally shy. However, she found confidence in theater. Polly participated actively in school plays and various musicals organized by her community. Frequently cast in lead roles, her primary aspiration was to become a successful actress in musical theater. Furthermore, Polly had a fondness for sleepovers. She enjoyed having friends over and visiting friends' homes for such gatherings, a regular activity within her social circle. On October 1st of that year, when she asked Eva if 2 friends, Jillian and Kate, could come over for a sleepover, her mother readily agreed. That afternoon, the friends arrived at Polly's house and spent the evening there quite contentedly initially. At around 9:45 p.m., Eva decided to go to bed due to a severe headache. Informing the girls of this decision and asking them not to hesitate to wake her if necessary, she took 2 sleeping pills and fell into a deep sleep shortly thereafter. It was past 11 p.m. when Eva was startled awake by the screams of her daughter's friends. Both girls informed her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly. Eva immediately contacted the police and checked on her other daughter, Annie, who appeared unaware of the commotion. When authorities arrived, they began questioning Polly's friends. The girls described that they had been in a room engaged in activities like picking Halloween costumes and indulging in general playful behavior. At approximately 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was bedtime, and her friends agreed. She mentioned fetching an inflatable bed she had prepared with her mom so they could all sleep together. Upon opening the bedroom door, they were confronted by a man brandishing a knife. The man did not conceal his face with a mask. Initially, due to the proximity to Halloween, the girls mistook this for a prank and laughed. Realizing it wasn't a joke, they became frightened as the man grew angry at their laughter. He forced them into another room and tied their hands and feet. Inquiring who resided in the house, they all identified Polly as the inhabitant. The intruder then removed pillowcases from nearby pillows, placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, and instructed them to count to 1,000. He assured them he was taking Polly for a brief period but would bring her back soon. After determining that their captor had left, Jillian and Kate attempted to free themselves. This effort lasted around 30 minutes. Once free, they rushed to inform Eva about Polly's abduction. They relayed this entire sequence to the police and provided a detailed description of the suspect, since he didn't hide his face. This enabled officers to create a sketch of the individual for a media investigation. Evidence at Polly's residence was sparse. Footprints noted were from Polly, her family, and recent visitors only. However, fibers found on the carpet differed significantly from those within Polly's home. These fibers were later identified as originating from automotive carpeting material. Police examined vehicles associated with individuals known to be at the house recently, yet found no match with these fibers, leading them to conclude that they belonged to the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was also discovered but couldn't be thoroughly analyzed due to technological limitations at that time. This detailed account provided critical insight for law enforcement's pursuit of justice in identifying and apprehending Polly's abductor. Back in 1993, advancements in fingerprinting, DNA analysis, and other forensic techniques were not what they are today. As a result, matching the found palm print with any database was not feasible at that time. However, the print was preserved for future comparisons with potential suspects. In Polly's room, another piece of evidence, a fabric that seemed to be silk, was discovered. It looked like it had been cut with scissors from a garment and had a distinctive pattern. Police believed this could aid them in future investigations. Additionally, a hair belonging to an unknown individual was found. Although DNA analysis techniques existed then, they were not yet developed enough to be effectively utilized. The search for Polly became one of the largest searches conducted in the United States up to that point. Around 4,000 volunteers joined the efforts, combing through neighborhoods near her home, vacant lots, and larger areas in the vicinity. Police attempted to identify drivers who resembled a sketch of the suspect but were unsuccessful. Officers aimed to find Polly within 24 hours of her disappearance because finding her alive would become increasingly difficult after that period. The FBI was involved to assist with the investigation, launching their efforts to locate her as quickly as possible. Despite their best efforts, days went by and hope of finding Polly alive started to wane. Police questioned neighbors about any unusual activity on the night Polly was abducted. Several neighbors reported seeing an odd man wandering around the area, but they did not suspect he would kidnap someone from a neighbor's house and thus did not alert emergency services. When police shared a sketch based on descriptions from Polly's friends with these neighbors, they all confirmed having seen the man. Officers also spoke with all the teachers and staff at Polly's school. They aimed to find out if anyone knew the man or had any information regarding Polly's disappearance. Alas, no one had any knowledge and everyone had an alibi for the relevant time period. None of the school staff matched either the sketch or the description provided. The police even compared fibers found in Polly's house with car mats from teachers' and staff members' cars, but none were a match. As days turned into weeks, the desperation of Polly's family, authorities, and the public increased. There was a growing fear that the man who kidnapped Polly posed a significant threat to society. This added more pressure on the police to resolve the case swiftly. A reward of $200,000 was offered for information leading to Polly's whereabouts, sponsored by actress Winona Ryder, who held a press conference urging for Polly's safe return. The Polly Klaas case had another peculiarity. In 1993, internet use wasn't widespread nor utilized by law enforcement for search operations or information dissemination. However, 3 California residents took it upon themselves to leverage this new technology for the search effort. They posted pictures of Polly, sketches of her kidnapper, and reward details online. Their efforts eventually reached an estimated 25 million people in the U.S. via various internet forums and communication channels. While the FBI hoped this would be pivotal in their investigation, it didn't yield significant leads. Despite heightened publicity and numerous tips, investigators lacked solid leads. Weeks elapsed since Polly's kidnapping. Frustration grew among investigators as they were unable to identify the kidnapper or obtain a DNA match from evidence collected. This sense of helplessness persisted until they received an unexpected phone call. A turning point that held promise quickly evaporated into uncertainty. Mark Klaas received a call from someone claiming to be his daughter, Polly. The girl stated she was at a hotel and that her captor had just stepped out briefly, giving her a chance to reach out. Unfortunately, the call was abruptly cut short before any additional details could be gathered. Mark promptly went to the police to inform them about the situation. At that time, the FBI lacked advanced tools to trace previously made calls. Consequently, they waited for another call, hoping to trace it. A few hours later, a second call came in from the same girl who had first spoken to Mark. After receiving this call, the police traced it and were surprised when it led them not to a hotel, but to a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived at the identified house, they knocked and soon discovered it was a prank. A teenage girl, similar in age to Polly, lived there, hence the voice resemblance. She explained her friends had dared her. Rather than taking her to the police station, they asked her parents to monitor her activities and cautioned her against making jokes about such serious matters. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly's disappearance, a woman called the police reporting 3 suspicious objects on a large piece of land she owned. The police and FBI who arrived on site found critical items related to the investigation. A piece of silk matching one from Polly's room, Velcro ties missing since that night, as mentioned by Eva, and duct tape. This discovery led police to speculate that Polly might be in the vicinity. Further investigation revealed new information. On the day of Polly's disappearance, this same woman had reported strangers frequently trespassing on her extensive wooded property, which had only a small house and no perimeter fence. The lack of barriers and signage meant many inadvertently wandered onto her land without realizing it was private property. The woman had numerous intruders, but one incident, in particular, stood out. On the night Polly was abducted, a man approached her house in his automobile. His car became stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, first saw the man but refrained from confronting him due to fear. The homeowner also chose not to approach him, noting an angry expression in his eyes. They then contacted the police. When the officers arrived, they questioned the man about his presence on the property. He stated he was unaware it was private property and expressed willingness to leave quickly, but requested assistance freeing his car from the mud. The officers observed that the man appeared very nervous and scared. He was sweating and seemed possibly drugged. At that time, they lacked the means to conduct a drug test, and since he wasn't being overtly aggressive, they had no grounds for arrest. Consequently, they aided him in extricating his car from the mud, and he eventually drove away. This individual's name was Richard Allen Davis. Richard Allen Davis was born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was fraught with violence inflicted by his parents. When Richard was 12 years old, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him and left him with his father. Richard's father proved to be highly irresponsible, often leaving him alone for extended periods. Sometimes Richard stayed with neighbors or relatives when being alone at home became untenable. By his teenage years, Richard started engaging in criminal activities, stealing things and getting into street fights, which frequently led to reform school stints. At 17 years old came a significant turning point in Richard's life. He committed a violent robbery that nearly resulted in severe injury to his victim. Faced with 2 options by the court, reform school or joining the U.S. Army, Richard opted for military service but lasted less than 2 years before receiving a dishonorable discharge due to continued misconduct and poor behavior. As Richard matured, he continued to encounter problems, and his criminal record grew significantly longer. Around the age of 20, he received a 15-year sentence for robbery and kidnapping. Despite this, he served only 1 year of the sentence due to parole for good behavior. At that period, Richard was also troubled by another accusation. Many friends believed that he had been involved in the disappearance of a 19-year-old girl named Marlene. Although the police concluded that she had left voluntarily, her close friends were convinced Richard had a role in her disappearance after they attended a party together. These accusations remained unproven and were largely based on rumors. When Polly disappeared, Richard was on probation and did not have a specific address. In response, the police issued a special bulletin exclusively for officers, urging them to exercise extreme caution. They withheld information from the media to prevent Richard from potentially fleeing California or even leaving the country. Ultimately, on November 30th, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol following a routine traffic stop by an officer. He failed a breathalyzer test. Upon inspection of his identity and photograph, the officer quickly realized that this was the individual linked to the Polly Klaas kidnapping case. Proceeding with care, the officer informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating his probation due to drunk driving. Without resistance, Richard agreed and was taken into custody. Once at the police station, officers read him his rights and disclosed that he was actually being detained for Polly Klaas kidnapping. During an extensive interrogation session, Richard eventually admitted to abducting Polly. The police speculated that his confession might have been made under duress. Evidence collected included his palm print, which matched one found at Polly's house perfectly. Carpet fibers from Polly's house were identical to those in his car's carpet as well. Polly's friends were brought in for questioning at the police station, where they unequivocally identified Richard as her abductor, supplying closure to their distressful ordeal. Another piece of silk, identical to the one found in the girl's room, was also discovered in his car and on the property of the woman who had contacted the police. Everything was against him, so he finally decided to confess. He mentioned that he had been using illegal substances with friends that day and was not feeling well. He made the decision to break into a house in a certain neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around for some time before arriving in Polly's neighborhood. He noticed an open window in a house and decided to climb in. According to him, he did not plan anything, never saw Polly, never saw her family, nor followed them. Once inside the house, he looked for valuables but found few items of interest. Just as he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard observed that Polly appeared very frightened, so he ultimately decided to take her with him. He stated that he put Polly in his car, began driving, and after a while stopped at a vacant lot where he violated Polly. Following this incident, he resumed driving. When the woman and babysitter saw Richard on private property, Polly was still in the back seat of his car. When police officers helped him pull his vehicle out of the mud, Polly was still alive. This caused much frustration among law enforcement personnel who believed her life could have been saved. Afterwards, Richard said he drove down the highway where he strangled Polly, dug a grave, and left her body there. On December 4th, 1993, Richard informed police about the precise location of the grave, where they began their search efforts. 2 months and 3 days after her kidnapping, Polly Klaas's body was located on the side of a highway in a grave dug by Richard himself. Forensic examination revealed little additional information. It confirmed that strangulation was indeed the cause of death, as stated by Richard. Further details could not be determined with precision. However, it is understood that her death occurred roughly around the time she disappeared. Given all the evidence, the man was put on trial for the kidnapping, murder, and rape of Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. He not only apologized to the family but also made a serious accusation against Polly's father, claiming he abused her. Richard stated that she said to him, "Don't do to me what my father does to me." This caused Polly's father to yell and almost stand up to hit him, though he was restrained by others. The defendant's words shocked everyone present, not just because of his accusation and lack of genuine apology, but also because no one believed Polly's father had done such things. Although it wasn't proven, Polly's father's former partner even defended him. On June 18, 1996, Richard was found guilty of Polly Klaas's kidnapping and murder. In August of that year, he received a death sentence. He attempted to challenge the sentence but failed. Then in 2006, after overdosing on pills in his cell, he was found unconscious but revived and sent back to prison. In 2009, his lawyer tried appealing his conviction to the Supreme Court but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court confirmed that he should be executed. Richard's attorney mentioned plans for further appeals. As a result of these continued appeals, Richard has remained on death row for several years without being executed. There is hope that once all appeals are exhausted within the next few years, the execution will proceed as planned. the case of Esmeralda Riches. Today we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. It is the Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car as 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair and touched her plump lips, which, like a powerful magnet, attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up. But she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, and interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today, before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She was 16-year-old Esmeralda Riches Martinez, born August 23, 2006, in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Elio Rosti and Isabel Martinez Riches. She grew up in a complete, happy family and had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers. He was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023 was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house, introduced himself as a teacher, and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car, except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding during the walk, forcing them to cut it short and bring her back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. However, the question remained, who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said, she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, while others were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had allegedly given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and, a few hours later, to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay because of the evidence collected against him. The prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person not as a punishment for a crime they have committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stalks were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily. Thinking it was a woman's menstrual cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to help her fall asleep. It was later discovered from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her friend an audio message in the early morning hours, asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." Unfortunately, the friend listened to the recording too late the next day, and Esmeralda was found lifeless on the floor of her bathroom, covered in blood. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police, and his home was searched the following day. During the search, the clothes he was wearing on the night out with his female students were seized. His cousin, Ruben Murillo, who was the second man present that night, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There were many ambiguities in the investigation into the event, and the prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation, rather than making new speculations about an incident that alarmed the public. The public demanded a thorough investigation to determine the real cause of the young girl's death, as many felt that obvious facts on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigators. The investigation involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, triggering the bleeding. The authorities urgently requested the car, but it was discovered that John Kelly's wife had sold it in a hurry. The investigation believed that the hasty sale of the car was an attempt to hide evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Panaga Pilar. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Panaga, the new owner of the car, the vehicle was finally inspected. However, other than traces of Esmeralda's blood found in the car, no other evidence was discovered. The court ruling determined that there was insufficient evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Rowe in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months, and the prosecutor launched his own inquiry, re-interviewing the three girls who accompanied Esmeralda. Their testimony helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night, minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., Jean Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin, Ruben Murillo Martinez, went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Trabande with three other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. Turned out that originally the whole group was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and altered the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Mau Beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store, where he bought a beer. Returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him, into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but one of Gerafen's noticed. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends. After a moment, without explanation, Jean appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45, when they stopped at a gas station parking lot. According to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmates said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches's blood were found. Traces of Esmeralda Riches's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom. At the gas station, they also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the fact. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that Esmeralda had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized, and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestation with contraceptive effect when taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen. This component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher, John Kelly, was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the Albarno Public Cemetery. As Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her, they described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin, Rubiel Milo Martinez, with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 2024 before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, despite knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Anemia Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in He. Rubiel Mauro Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for Houghton eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm gonna let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle, fear wins, taking precious life.